The gates had not opened for strangers in 3 years. Not since the last war. Not since the last time someone had come to the Lycan stronghold with something other than tribute or surrender. The 2 guards standing at the iron entrance that morning had grown used to the quiet. They had grown used to the cold mist that came off the mountains at dawn, and to the sound of birds that nested in the high stone walls, and to the long, uneventful hours that made up a guard shift when nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened at the gate anymore. That was why, when the shape appeared on the road below, neither of them moved right away. It was small, that was the first thing. Too small to be a soldier, too small to be a traitor, too small to be anything that warranted immediate concern. It moved steadily up the long road that led from the valley floor to the stronghold's main entrance, and it did not slow down, and it did not stop to look at the walls the way strangers usually did. Most people, when they came to the Lycan stronghold for the first time, stopped at some point on the road and looked up. The stronghold had that effect. It was built into the face of a mountain, its walls the color of old iron, its towers rising at angles that seemed to lean toward the sky like something hungry. It was the kind of place that made a person pause and reconsider their life choices. The shape on the road did not pause. It just kept walking. Garrett, the older of the 2 guards, finally reached for the rim of his helmet and shifted it against his forehead, squinting down the road. He had spent 14 years guarding various gates and doorways in service to the Lycan king, and he had developed a reliable instinct for trouble. That instinct was speaking to him now, but it was saying something he couldn't quite make sense of. "Is that," said the younger guard Owen, "a child?" Garrett said nothing. It was a child, he could see that clearly now. A girl, by the look of her, somewhere between 8 and 10 years old, wearing clothes that had once been a dark color, and were now the particular shade of brown that comes from long travel through mud, rain, and everything else the road throws at a person. Her hair was matted in places and tangled in others, and she was carrying nothing, no bag, no pack, no bundle of any kind, except for a small piece of cloth that she held in her right hand the way a person holds something they do not intend to put down under any circumstances. She walked up to the gate and stopped directly in front of it and looked up at the 2 guards on the wall above her. She did not look lost. That was the thing that caught in Garrett's chest and stayed there. A lost child looks a certain way. There is a particular quality to the eyes, a kind of unfocused searching, a face that is on the verge of crumbling under the weight of not knowing where to go. This girl's eyes were focused. She was looking at the gate the way a person looks at a door. They have every intention of walking through. "Who are you?" Garrett called down. "I need to come in," she said. Her voice was clear, not loud but clear. It carried up the wall without effort, the way voices do when the person speaking has decided that being heard is not optional. "That is not an answer," Owen said. "My name is Nell," she said. "I have come to see the king." Garrett and Owen looked at each other. In 14 years, Garrett had heard many things shouted up at him from the road below. He had heard threats. He had heard pleas. He had heard the particular kind of desperation that people produce when they have run out of other options and the gate is the last one in front of them. He had never heard a child under the age of 12 state, calmly and without any obvious anxiety, that she had come to see the king. "The king," Owen repeated. "Yes," Nell said. She shifted the cloth in her hand slightly, not impatiently, just the way a person shifts their grip when they are standing still and the weight of something is reminding them it is there. "I have traveled a long way. I would prefer not to wait outside." "You cannot simply walk in and ask to see the king," Garrett said. "I know that," she said. "That is why I am asking you to let me in so that I can ask someone with more authority to arrange it." There was a pause. The mist moved through the gap between the road and the base of the wall. A bird called somewhere above them. "She has a point," Owen said quietly, not quite quietly enough. "She does not have a point," Garrett said also quietly. Then louder down to the girl, "This is the stronghold of King Aldrich of the Lycan people. You cannot come in without a reason." "I have a reason," she said. "What reason?" She looked up at him for a moment, then she held up the piece of cloth. From this distance, Garrett could not read what was written on it. He could see that something was written on it, in letters that looked careful and deliberate, as though the person who had written them had understood that the message needed to survive longer than the paper it was written on. The cloth was soft and worn at the edges. It had been folded and unfolded many times. "I need to show this to someone inside," she said. "I cannot show it to you from here." Why not? Because you are not the person it is meant for. Garrett stared at her. She stared back. She was not defiant, exactly. She was simply certain, in the way that people are certain when they have thought something through many times and arrived at the same answer each time and are no longer interested in entertaining other conclusions. Open the small door, he told Owen. Let her in, keep her in the front yard, I will go find the captain. He found the captain, a broad, sharp-eyed man named Cole who had been running the stronghold's security for 6 years, and who responded to most unexpected developments with a flat expression and a series of very practical questions. Garrett told him what had arrived at the gate. Cole's flat expression did not change. A child, he said. Yes, sir. Alone. Yes, sir. Carrying a piece of cloth. Yes, sir. And she wants to see the king. She says she has come to see the king. She hasn't said she wants anything exactly. She seems very clear that she is going to, rather than that she would like to. Cole looked at him for a moment. Then he stood up from behind the table where he had been reviewing supply records and put his coat on with the quiet efficiency of a man who has accepted that his morning has been rerouted. The front yard of the stronghold was a wide, stone-paved space between the outer gate and the inner doors of the keep. It was used for deliveries, for the arrival of guests, for the occasional formal reception. At this hour it was mostly empty, a few stable hands moving across it at a distance, a dog sleeping in the one patch of early sunlight that had made it through the clouds. Nell was standing in the middle of it. She was not sitting on the stone bench near the wall. She was not leaning against anything. She was standing in the center of the yard with her hands at her sides and the cloth still in her right hand, and she was looking at the inner doors of the keep the way she had looked at the outer gate, as though she had already decided she was going through them and was simply waiting for the appropriate sequence of events to conclude. Cole walked up to her and stopped. She looked up at him. I am told you wish to see the king, he said. Yes, sir. May I ask what this is about? I would rather explain it to him directly, she said. That is not how this works. I understand that, she said, but the thing I have to tell him is not something I want to explain twice. If I tell you, you will have questions, and then I will have to explain it again to the person above you, and that person will have questions, and then I will have to explain it again to the king. I would prefer to explain it once. Cole looked at her for a long moment. The dog in the patch of sunlight shifted in its sleep and did not wake up. You are very organized for someone your age, he said. I have had to be, she said. He asked her name, she told him. He asked her where she had come from. She said the Eastern Valley settlements. He asked how she had traveled. She said on foot and by cart when someone offered and on foot again when they didn't. He asked how long she had been traveling. She said approximately 3 weeks. 3 weeks, he said, alone. Yes, sir. He studied her face. She did not look away. There was something in her eyes that was not anger and not sadness, and not the kind of desperate hope that he was used to seeing in people who had come to the stronghold asking for help. It was something quieter than all of those, something that had been made through a long, slow process of having nothing and continuing anyway. I cannot take you to the king without a reason, he said. That is not a bureaucratic obstacle. It is a genuine matter of his safety and yours. If you cannot tell me why you are here, I cannot help you. She looked at him, a breath passed, then she held out the cloth. He took it carefully, the way you take something from someone who has been holding it for a very long time. He unfolded it. He read what was written on it. He read it again. His expression, which had been professionally neutral, did something small and involuntary around the edges. He refolded the cloth very carefully and held it back out to her. She took it and put it back in her hand. Wait here, he said. He did not run. Running was not something Cole did in front of other people, as a matter of policy. But he walked to the inner doors with a speed that made 2 passing stable hands turn and watch him go. King Aldrich of the Lycan people was, at that moment, in the East Tower. The East Tower was not where the king conducted official business. Official business happened in the war room, or the throne room, or the long hall where the council met 3 times a week. The East Tower was where Aldrich went when he wanted to be somewhere that people could technically find him, but would feel uncomfortable interrupting without a very good reason. It had a window that looked out over the valley below the mountain, and on clear mornings the view stretched far enough that you could see the faint line where the eastern forest met the beginning of the plains. He was standing at that window when Cole came in. Aldrich was a large man. Not in the way that large men are sometimes described, as though size were a substitute for character. He was large in the way that things are large when they have grown into their shape over time and through use. He had the kind of face that does not invite casual conversation, not because it was unkind, but because it had seen enough to have moved past the part where most things are surprising. He was 41 years old and had been king since he was 26, and the 15 years between those 2 points had done the kind of work on a person that does not show in obvious ways, but shows in everything. He heard Cole's footsteps and did not turn around. "Whatever it is," he said, "let it wait 20 minutes. "I don't think it can, sir," Cole said. Something in Cole's voice made Aldrich turn. Cole told him what had arrived at the gate. He was efficient about it. Cole was always efficient, and he did not editorialize, which was one of the things Aldrich valued most about him. He reported what had happened and what the girl had said and what had been written on the cloth, and then he stopped talking and let the information sit in the room. Aldrich stood very still. "Say the name again," he said. Cole said it again. Aldrich's jaw moved once, just slightly, the way a jaw moves when a person is holding something back that has decided it would very much like to come forward. Then he turned back to the window for a moment, looking out at the valley. The light was early and thin, and the mist was still moving through the lower parts of the road. "She is in the front yard," Cole said. "Yes, sir." "Alone?" "Yes, sir." 3 weeks on foot from the eastern settlements. "Give or take," Cole said. Aldrich looked out at the valley for another few seconds. Then he turned from the window and walked to the door. Cole stepped aside. He followed the king down the tower stairs and across the inner corridor and through the heavy interior doors, and neither of them said anything. They came out into the front yard. Nell was still standing in the center of it. She heard the doors and turned. She looked at the captain first, because he was the person she had been dealing with, and then her eyes moved to the man who had come through the doors with him. She looked at Aldrich the way she had looked at the gate and the inner doors, directly, without flinching, measuring. Aldrich stopped. She was small, even smaller up close than she had seemed from a distance, the way children sometimes are when you are not used to being around them. Her clothes were worn and stiff with dried road dirt. Her hair needed attention. There was a thin, faded line along her left jaw that looked like the remnant of an old injury. She had dark eyes that were currently performing what appeared to be a systematic evaluation of him from his boots to his face, moving upward without hurry. She finished her evaluation. Then she walked forward, crossing the yard toward him with the same steady, unhurried pace she had used on the road, and she stopped when she was close enough that looking up at him required a significant angle. She held up the cloth. He looked at it, he looked at her. He reached out and took the cloth from her hand and unfolded it and read it. He read it in the way that a person reads something they need to be absolutely certain of, reading each word separately as though the sentence might mean something different if the words are examined individually. He read it twice. He refolded it. He held it out to her. She took it. There was a silence. The dog in the patch of sunlight woke up, looked at them, and went back to sleep. A gust of wind came through the yard from somewhere above. "My name is Nell," she said. "I have come from the Eastern Valley. I have traveled 3 weeks. I do not have any family living. I have been on my own for 2 years. She paused. "I have thought about this very carefully, and I have decided that you are the person I need, and so I need you to come with me." Aldrich did not speak. "I know that sounds strange," she said. "I know you are a king and that kings do not simply come with people, but I have thought about other options and I do not have any. And I have thought about the things a person needs when they are on their own, and the thing I need most is a father, and I have decided that you are going to be one. My father, if you agree." She stopped. Then, with the particular precision of someone who has rehearsed a thing many times and is now saying it for real, "You're coming with me. I need a father." The yard was very quiet. Cole, standing behind and to the left of the king, was looking at a point on the wall somewhere above the girl's head. His face was doing something it very rarely did, which was absolutely nothing, with great concentration. Aldrich looked at the girl. She looked back at him. In the window of the east tower, a figure stood watching the yard below. One of the palace servants, passing with a load of linens, glanced out and stopped to look, and then moved on without quite being able to say what it was they had seen. Aldrich took one slow breath in and let it out through his nose. He was a man who had faced many things in his life. He had faced battles and councils and losses and betrayals, and the long, grinding work of keeping a kingdom together when everything around it was pushing for it to fall apart. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a man who could be made to freeze in place by a sentence from a small girl in a dirty coat. He froze in place. The cloth, she was holding it again now, both hands wrapped around it. She was not shaking. She was standing exactly as she had been standing since she walked into this yard, straight, still, present, waiting. Not hoping, waiting, there was a difference. He looked at her for a long time. Then, very slowly, he reached down and he took the cloth from her hands. Not to read it again, he had read it. He held it carefully, the way a person holds something old and important, and he looked at it and then he looked at her, and she looked back at him, and something moved across his face that was not a smile and was not grief and was not surprise, and was not any single thing that had a name, but was all of them at once, pressed together into an expression that lasted only a moment before his face settled back into the careful stillness it usually wore. He held the cloth out. She took it back. "Come inside," he said. It was not an answer. She seemed to understand that. She also seemed to understand that it was not a refusal. She tucked the cloth into the front of her coat against her chest and turned toward the inner doors. She walked through them without looking back to see if he was following. He followed. Cole remained in the yard alone for a moment. He looked at the empty space where the girl had stood. He looked at the doors that had closed behind the king. He walked back to his table and his supply records, and he sat down and he picked up his pen. Then he put the pen down. Then he sat with his hands flat on the table for a while, thinking about a piece of cloth and the name that had been written on it, and about a girl who had traveled 3 weeks on foot and arrived at the most guarded gate in the territory and walked through it without once looking as though she thought there was any possibility it would stay closed. Outside, the mist was beginning to lift. The sun came through the gap in the clouds and lit the road in long, thin stripes, and somewhere above the gate, a bird that had been sitting on the wall since before dawn opened its wings and flew up into the pale morning sky. The war room was not a comfortable place on purpose. Aldrich had made that decision when he first took the throne. Comfortable rooms produced comfortable thinking, and comfortable thinking produced decisions that felt good in the moment and fell apart under pressure. The war room had one long table, 12 chairs that had no cushions, 2 maps on the wall that were updated every week, and a single window that faced north so the light it let in was always flat and honest. There was nothing in it that encouraged a person to relax. He brought Nell there anyway. She walked in ahead of him and stood at the center of the room and looked at the maps the way she had looked at everything else since arriving, with a focused attention that took in details and filed them and moved on. She looked at the table. She looked at the chairs. She looked at the window. She turned and looked at him. "Sit down," he said. She pulled out the chair at the far end of the table, the one farthest from the door, and sat in it. Her feet did not reach the floor. She placed her hands on the table's surface and looked at him steadily. He sat at the other end of the table. This put 12 empty chairs between them, which was not ideal, but he did not move his chair and she did not move hers, and the distance seemed, somehow, appropriate for what they were doing, which was beginning. "You said your name is Nell," he said. "Yes. How old are you?" "9, she said. "I will be 10 in the spring." "And you have been on your own for 2 years?" "Yes. Since you were 7. "Yes. He did not say anything to that immediately. He looked at his hands on the table for a moment, then back at her. "Where did you come from before the eastern settlements?" "I moved around," she said. "Before that I was at a village called Corton. Before that I was in the river towns for a while. Before that I was at the settlement where my mother died." She said the last part the way you say a fact about geography, not without feeling, but with the kind of quiet that comes after feeling has been held for a long time and has settled into something that no longer moves unless you let it. "How did she die?" he asked. "Fever," she said. "It came through the settlement in the autumn 2 years ago. Many people died. She was the only one I was responsible for." He looked at her. "You were 7 years old and responsible for your mother." "She was sick for a long time before the fever," Nell said. "I had been managing things for a while before that." Managing things. He sat with those 2 words for a moment. He thought about what it meant to manage things when you were a small child, and your mother was ill, in a settlement far from any city or stronghold or source of organized help. He thought about what decisions that required, and what it cost to make those decisions at an age when most children were learning letters and getting into trouble over small things. He did not say any of that, he just listened. After she died, Nell continued, I packed what I could carry and I left. I found work in the river towns doing small things, watching other people's goods at the market, carrying messages, running errands for the traders. I was small enough that people did not worry about me stealing, and I was careful enough that people came back to use me again. She paused. I saved money. Not much, but some, enough to travel. And you used that money to come here, he said. Eventually, she said, but first I used some of it to get information. This was new. He leaned forward slightly without meaning to. What kind of information? She reached into her coat and brought out the cloth. She placed it on the table between them, not pushing it toward him, just placing it there. Then she reached back into her coat and brought out something else, a small, folded piece of paper, softer than the cloth, worn at the folds. She placed that beside it. Then she reached into the coat a third time and brought out another, then another. She arranged them on the table in a row with a precision that suggested they had an order, and she was putting them in it. There were 6 pieces of paper in total. She smoothed the last one down carefully and looked up at him. I spent 8 months gathering information about you, she said. He looked at the papers on the table. He looked at her. Something in his face, which had been doing its professional work of staying still, shifted just slightly. You are 9 years old, he said. Yes, and you spent 8 months researching me. I wanted to be sure, she said. I could not afford to choose the wrong person. I only had enough for one choice. She said it simply, without drama, but it landed in the room the way things land when they are true and specific and carry weight. He heard it. May I? He gestured toward the papers. She nodded. He stood and walked the length of the table to where she sat and picked up the first paper. It was a list of names, people by the look of them, with notes beside each name in small, careful handwriting that he recognized immediately as the handwriting of someone who had learned to write without a teacher. The letters were correct, but they had a particular quality that formal schooling does not produce, a slight irregularity that comes from figuring it out through observation rather than instruction. The list was of his generals. Beside each name was a brief description of what they did and whether they had families. The information was accurate. Some of it was information that was not publicly available. He picked up the second paper. It was a timeline of decisions he had made over the past 3 years, major ones, visible ones, the kind that get talked about in the settlements and towns that fall under the Lycan territory. There were notes beside several of them, brief assessments in that same careful handwriting, where he had been firm, where he had been merciful, where he had chosen a harder option when an easier one was available. He picked up the third paper. It was a list of things he had not done, places he could have taken by force and hadn't, villages he could have taxed more heavily and hadn't, disputes he could have settled in his own favor and hadn't. He put it down and looked at her. You compiled all of this, he said. Yes, she said. I talked to traders who moved through Lycan territory. I talked to travelers. I talked to people who had been here and left and people who had considered coming here. I asked them specific questions and I wrote down the answers and I looked for patterns. What patterns were you looking for? She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the papers on the table, then at him. I was looking for evidence that you keep your word, she said, and that you do not leave people behind when it would be easier to do so, and that you make decisions based on what is right rather than what is easy. She paused. And I was looking for evidence that you were not someone who hurts people who are smaller than him. The room was very quiet. And he said, the evidence was sufficient, she said. He stood at the table looking down at her, and there was something happening in his chest that was not something he had expected to happen this morning, or on any morning in recent memory. He could not have named it exactly. It was the feeling that comes when something you thought was finished, some door you thought had closed permanently, turns out to still have air moving under it. Tell me about the cloth, he said. She did not move immediately. She looked at the cloth where it lay on the table, and her expression did something small and brief, a flicker, like a flame in a draft, before settling again. My mother gave it to me, she said, before she died. She wrote a name on it and she told me to find that person. She picked it up and held it, not showing him again, just holding it. She said that if I found myself in a situation I could not handle, I should find the person whose name was on the cloth. She said that person would help me. Did she tell you why? No, Nell said, she did not have time. A silence. Outside the north window, a cloud moved and the flat light shifted briefly into something almost warm before going flat again. Did she tell you anything else? He asked. She told me to be careful, Nell said, and she told me to be smart, and she told me that the world is not always kind to people who do not have someone to stand with them. She looked up at him, and then she told me that I was going to be all right. She said it like she believed it. Did you believe it? She considered this with the seriousness she appeared to apply to everything. I did not know if it was true, she said, but I thought that if I worked hard enough at it I could make it true. That seemed like a reasonable approach. He looked at her for a long time. He walked back to his chair at the other end of the table and sat down. He put his elbows on the table and laced his fingers together and rested his chin on them, and looked at the girl who was sitting across 12 empty chairs from him, with her papers arranged in front of her and the cloth in her hands. She did not fidget, she did not look away, she waited. You said you need a father, he said. Yes, and you have decided that I am going to be one. Yes, you understand, he said carefully, that this is not a small thing you are asking. I know, she said, that is why I spent 8 months being sure. I am not asking about the difficulty for you, he said. I am asking whether you understand what you are asking of me. She looked at him, her head tilted slightly to one side, just a fraction. I am asking you to be responsible for me, she said, to make decisions with my well-being in mind, to be a person I can come to when things are difficult, to be present. She paused. I am aware that these things take time and effort. I am aware that they are not easy for anyone and perhaps especially for someone in your position. I am asking anyway. Why me specifically, he said, leaving aside the cloth. Looking at it only from the perspective of your research, why not find a family in one of the settlements? Why not find a couple who wanted a child and apply that same thoroughness to selecting them? I thought about that, she said. It is a reasonable option. I considered it for approximately 4 months. And a family in a settlement can be threatened, she said. They can be pressured. If someone wanted to find me and hurt me or take me, a farming family in the Eastern Valley would not be able to stop them. She said it without self-pity, as though she were describing a logistical problem. You cannot be threatened in the same way. People who want to harm someone under your protection have to come through you first. And based on my research, coming through you is not something people do successfully very often. He was quiet for a moment. You chose me because I am difficult to get past, he said. I chose you for several reasons, she said. That is one of them. What are the others? She looked at him. For the first time since she had walked through the gate, something in her expression shifted into territory that was less certain than the rest of her, something softer, something that she seemed to be deciding whether to let through. You have not given up on anything that was yours, she said quietly. In every account I found, in every story people told about you, you have never abandoned what you were responsible for, even when it would have been much easier. She paused. I want to be something you are responsible for. The silence that followed, that was different from the other silences in the room. It had a weight to it that the previous ones hadn't had. Aldrich unclasped his hands. He put them flat on the table. He looked at them. He looked at the far wall. Behind him, outside the door, there were 3 members of his senior staff waiting. He knew they were there because people were always waiting in the corridor outside the war room when he was in it, in case something was needed. He knew that news of the girl's arrival had already moved through the keep at the particular speed that unusual things travel in enclosed spaces where people live and work closely together. He knew that by the time the evening meal was served, everyone in the stronghold would have heard some version of what had happened at the gate this morning. He knew all of that, and he set it aside, because it was not the thing that mattered in this moment. He reached across the long table and picked up the 3rd paper, the list of things he had not done, and he read it again from the beginning. She had gotten most of it right. There were 2 items that were not quite accurate, where the full truth of what had happened was more complicated than the stories that had filtered out to the settlements. But the assessment beside each item, the reading of why he had made those choices, was correct. She had understood the reason, from talking to traders and travelers, from 8 months of careful listening. He put the paper down. There are people here, he said, who will have questions. I expected that, she said. It will not be simple. I know. And you are still sure. She looked at him and something settled in her face, something final and quiet, like the last word in a sentence that has been building for a long time. I am sure, she said. He nodded once. He did not say yes, he did not say no. He nodded and then he stood and he walked to the door and he opened it, and there were indeed 3 members of his staff standing in the corridor outside, doing an extremely convincing impression of people who had simply been passing by and had stopped to look at the wall. He looked at them and they looked at him and he said, very calmly and with the tone of a man issuing a straightforward instruction, have the east room prepared, the one that faces the garden, and have someone bring food enough for 2. He went back into the war room and left the door open. Nell was still sitting at the end of the table with her papers and her cloth. She watched him come back and sit down. The iced room, she said. It is a room, he said. You will stay in it while we work out the rest. While we work out the rest, she repeated, not mocking it, considering it. Yes, he said. She put the papers back inside her coat one by one, in the same careful order she had taken them out in. She put the cloth in last, in the inside pocket, closest to her chest. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him. Thank you, she said. It was simple. It was not theatrical. It was the thank you of someone who has been waiting a long time for something, and now that it has arrived, is choosing to receive it quietly because making a large thing of it might break it. He looked at her across the 12 empty chairs. We will talk more, he said. There is a great deal I want to know. I know, she said. I have things I want to know as well. Such as? She tilted her head slightly. I want to know if you are a good person, she said. I believe you are based on the evidence, but evidence is not the same as knowing. I would like to know. He held her gaze for a long moment. That, he said, is a question I will try to answer through behavior rather than words. She looked at him for a beat. Then she nodded once, with the particular gravity of someone accepting a commitment that they intend to hold the other person to. That is the right answer, she said. Outside the war room window, the clouds had cleared enough to let through a strip of genuine morning light. It moved across the floor of the room slowly, reaching toward the table, toward the chairs, toward the 2 people sitting at opposite ends of a long table in a room built for difficult decisions, reaching toward them the way light reaches toward anything that has been in the dark for a while. The east room had a garden window. Nell stood in front of it for a long time after the woman, a quiet, efficient person named Dora who had the look of someone who had been managing difficult situations for many years and had made peace with this, finished showing her where things were and left. The garden below was not large. It had a stone path through the middle and several plants that had gone brown and quiet for the winter, and a low wall at the far end with a gate in it that led to somewhere Nell could not see from where she was standing. She looked at the garden and then she looked at the room. The room was the largest she had ever been alone in. That was a specific and concrete observation, not an emotional one, though it produced something that felt like emotion, a quiet, unsettling largeness, the way open water feels when you're used to rivers. The bed was very high and had a frame of dark wood and a cover on it that was the color of autumn leaves. There was a table with a lamp on it and a chair by the fire that someone had lit before she arrived. There was a small shelf with 3 books on it and a basin of clean water with a cloth beside it. She did not sit on the bed. She did not sit in the chair. She stood at the window and continued looking at the garden for a while, cataloging it, placing it in the part of her mind where she kept things that were real and confirmed. And then she went to the basin and washed her face and hands very thoroughly and changed her shirt, which was the only additional shirt she had, from the inner pocket of her coat where she had been keeping it for a situation that seemed to warrant it. Then she sat down on the floor with her back against the bed, and her coat on the floor beside her and the cloth in her lap, and she waited. She was good at waiting. She had gotten good at it the same way she had gotten good at most things, which was through necessity and repetition. Waiting without knowing what you were waiting for was the hardest kind. Waiting when you knew the shape of what was coming, when you had planned for it and moved toward it for months, was different. It was the waiting you did before something you had worked for arrived, and it had a different texture, steadier, heavier, like the air before rain. She thought about her mother. She did not let herself do this often. It was not a useful exercise in most circumstances, because it led to a particular kind of feeling that made it harder to think clearly and make good decisions. And for most of the past 2 years, thinking clearly and making good decisions had been the thing that kept her going. But she allowed it now, briefly, in the east room with the fire going and the garden below the window, because something in the room felt like it could hold it. Her mother had been a thin woman with dark eyes and careful hands, and she had been sick for a long time before Nell had fully understood what sick meant in the particular way she was sick, which was the kind of sick that does not get better, only slower or faster. She had been gentle in the way that some people are gentle, not because life has been gentle to them, but because they have decided that gentleness is the thing worth protecting even when nothing around it is gentle. She had told Nell stories. She had taught Nell to read from whatever paper she could find. She had, near the end, when she could no longer sit up for very long, described a man whose name she wrote on the cloth, and she had said things about him that she had never said before, and Nell had listened to every word and kept every word and carried every word for 2 years. She had not told Aldrich everything yet. There was more on the cloth than just the name. There was a sentence written below it, small and pressed close together as though the person writing it had been conserving space or strength or both. Nell had read that sentence so many times that the words had worn grooves in her mind the way water wears grooves in stone. She had not shown that part to the captain or to the king. She was not ready to show it yet. It was the most valuable piece of information she had, and she had learned through 2 years of managing alone that you do not share your most valuable information until you know exactly what you are getting in exchange. She was not being calculating, or rather she was being calculating, but not coldly. She was calculating in the way that people calculate when they are trying to protect something that matters. There was a knock at the door. She stood up from the floor and put the cloth back in her coat, which she picked up and pulled on, and then she crossed the room and opened the door. It was not Dora. It was a boy, perhaps 11 or 12, carrying a tray with food on it. He had a round face and an expression of profound interest that he was making only minimal effort to conceal. He looked at her and she looked at him. "I am Percy," he said. "I am supposed to bring this." "Thank you, Percy," she said. He did not move. He was looking at her with the frank curiosity of someone who has heard a significant piece of information and is now confronted with the physical reality of it, and is finding that the reality requires more processing time than the information did. "You are the girl from the gate," he said. "Yes," she said. "Cole said you walked here from the eastern settlements." "Yes." "That is very far." "Yes," she said. "You do not seem very tired." "I am," she said. "I am very tired. I am also hungry. May I have the tray?" He remembered the tray and held it out. She took it. It was heavier than she expected. She looked at what was on it: bread, a bowl of something that smelled of broth and vegetables, a smaller bowl with dried fruit in it, a cup of something warm, more food than she had seen arranged for a single person in longer than she could clearly remember. "Percy," she said. He had started to turn away. He looked back. "What is the king like?" she said. "Not from what people tell visitors. What is he like here in the keep, day to day?" Percy blinked. He thought about this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "He is quiet," he said finally. "He does not talk very much unless he is working. He remembers names. He notices things. Last month a man in the kitchens had a bad knee and could not carry the heavy pots, and the king noticed he was walking differently and told the head cook to adjust his duties without making a point of it to anyone." Percy paused. "He is strict, but not mean. There is a difference." "Yes," she said, "there is." "Are you really going to stay here?" he asked. "I intend to," she said. He looked at her for another moment with that frank interest. Then he nodded with the particular decisiveness of someone who has formed an opinion and is satisfied with it. "Good," he said, and then he walked away down the corridor. She went back in and closed the door and sat at the small table and ate the food slowly and methodically. She did not rush it, even though part of her wanted to, because she had been hungry often enough to know that eating too fast when you were very hungry produced its own problems. She ate the bread and the soup, and most of the dried fruit, and drank the warm cup, which turned out to be a sort of tea she did not recognize but which was pleasant, and when she was done, she put the empty tray near the door and went back to the window. The garden was still there. The light had changed while she ate, moving toward noon, and the brown plants cast longer shadows now, and the stone path was bright in the thin winter sun. She watched a cat move along the top of the low wall at the far end, pausing to look at something below, then continuing. It moved with the unhurried confidence of something that belongs to the space it moves through. She wanted to belong to a space. That was under everything else, under the research and the planning and the cloth and the logic, the thing she wanted. To be in a place where the fact of her presence did not need to be continually justified. To sleep in the same bed more than 3 nights in a row. To leave something behind in a room and know it would still be there when she came back. She had not told Aldrich that. She was not sure she would. It was not the kind of information that was useful in negotiations. But she thought it, standing at the window watching the cat disappear over the far wall, and she allowed the thought to be there for a moment before putting it somewhere careful. There was a second knock. This one was different, not a boy with a tray but something else, something heavier, a knock that expected the door to be answered rather than hoping it would be. She crossed the room and opened it. Aldrich was standing in the corridor. He was not in the formal clothes he had been wearing in the war room. He had changed into simpler clothes, dark, without decoration, and he was carrying nothing, and there was no one with him, which surprised her. She had not expected him to come without his captain, or some other official presence. He looked at her, he looked at the tray near the door, he looked at the fire which was still going and the window. "Did you eat?" he said. "Yes," she said, "it was very good, thank you." He nodded. "May I come in?" She stepped back and held the door. He came in and stood near the window, looking out at the garden the way she had been looking at it. He put his hands behind his back and stood there for a moment, and she sat on the edge of the chair by the fire and looked at him. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what I asked," she said. "About what you asked," he agreed. He turned from the window. "I want to understand something. You said that you chose me after research. But you also said that your mother gave you the cloth with my name on it. These two things tell a different story." She had expected this. It was a good question. She had known it was coming since she sat down in the war room. "They are not contradictory," she said. "My mother gave me the cloth as a direction. She gave it to me and told me that if I needed help I should find you. That was a starting point." She paused. "But I am not someone who acts only on what someone else tells me. I needed to know for myself, so I found out for myself. And if the research had not confirmed what she said, if you had found evidence that I was someone who could not be trusted, then I would not have come," she said simply. "The cloth would have stayed in my pocket, and I would have found another direction." He was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her with an expression she was learning to read, a careful look, not guarded exactly but considered. He was a person who thought before he spoke. She appreciated that. "There is something you have not told me," he said. She looked at him. "On the cloth," he said, "there is more than the name." She did not answer immediately. "I noticed the way you were holding it in the yard," he said. "The way your hands covered most of it. I did not say anything at the time because it did not seem like the right moment." She held his gaze. He was more observant than she had accounted for. She had known he was observant. The reports had suggested it. But knowing it in the abstract and encountering it directly were different things. She reached into her coat and brought out the cloth. She held it for a moment, then she unfolded it and held it out to him. He took it, he read the name at the top. Then he read the sentence below it. It was short, 8 words, written smaller than the name, pressed close together, in the handwriting that Nell had memorized the way you memorize something you have looked at in the dark so many times that you could draw it by feel. He read it. He stood very still. Something happened to his face. It was not subtle. It was not the small, controlled shift she had seen in the war room when she had first told him what she needed. It was larger than that, something that moved through him and altered his expression entirely for a few seconds. Something that looked like being struck by something you did not see coming even though part of you had always known it might come. He read the 8 words again. He folded the cloth very carefully, the way he had in the yard, and held it out to her. She took it and put it away. He turned back to the window. She waited. "Your mother's name," he said finally. His voice was level. He had it under control, but she could hear what the control was working against. "Vera," she said. He nodded once slowly. "You knew her," Nell said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. Another pause. The fire shifted. Outside, the light was moving toward afternoon. "She never told me about you," Nell said carefully. "Not before she was dying. I did not know there was a person whose name she was keeping until she gave me the cloth. That sounds like her, he said quietly, and there was something in those words that was old and settled and private, something she understood she was not meant to dig into just yet. She let it sit. She said 8 words, Nell said. She had limited time and limited strength, and she used 8 words about you. She must have believed they were the most important 8. He did not say anything. I have thought about those 8 words for 2 years, she said. They are the reason I trusted the research. The research told me what kind of person you are. But the 8 words told me something else. He turned from the window and looked at her. What did they tell you? He said. She looked back at him, this large, quiet man in the afternoon light of the room she had been given, with the garden behind him and the fire beside her. They told me that she trusted you, she said, and my mother did not trust easily. He held her gaze for a long moment, then he looked at the floor once briefly before looking back up. No, he said, she did not. They stayed in that for a while, the two of them, the fire making its small sounds between them, the afternoon light moving slowly through the garden window, the keep going about its business on the other side of the closed door. She sat in the chair and he stood at the window, and neither of them spoke, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have just shown each other something true and are taking a moment to let it settle before they move on. After a while he said, I have not been able to answer yes or no to what you asked. I know, she said. I want you to understand that it is not because the answer is no. She looked at him, then why? He sat down in the chair at the small table, the one she had eaten at. He laced his hands together and looked at them, then at her. Because yes is a serious word, he said, and I am someone who keeps the words he says. If I say yes to this, I say it for the rest of my life. Not for a season, not until something more complicated arrives. I need you to understand that before you hear it. She felt something move through her that was not quite what she had expected to feel, standing for a moment before the dam of it. She held it. I understand that, she said. He looked at her steadily. Then yes, he said. Cole found out through Percy, which was how most things in the stronghold traveled when they were too significant to announce formally and too significant to ignore. Percy, who had been 12 for approximately 4 months, and who treated this as a professional credential in the field of information exchange, told the head cook, who told the laundry woman, who told the second guardsman on the north wall, who told his replacement at shift change, and by the time the evening fire was lit in the great hall, Cole had heard 3 different versions of the same essential fact. The king had given the girl from the gate a room and said yes to something. The nature of that yes was described differently in each version, ranging from the moderately accurate to the frankly creative, but the fact of it was consistent. Cole waited until the hall had cleared and the fire was burning low before he went to find Aldrich. He found him, as he often did in the evenings, in the small study behind the war room, not the formal study where he received visitors, but the actual working one, which had maps and books stacked in ways that made navigating the room an act of careful memory. Aldrich was sitting in the chair by the window with a cup of something that had gone cold and a piece of paper on the arm of the chair that he was not reading. He was looking out the window at the night. Cole came in and did not sit down. He stood a respectful distance away and waited. Aldrich knew he was there. He always knew when someone came in. He just continued looking out the window for a moment, and then he reached over and moved the paper off the arm of the chair and set the cold cup on the small table beside him. "Close the door," he said. Cole closed it. "Sit down." Cole sat. He chose the chair across from Aldrich's, the worn one that had been there since Aldrich's predecessor, and he settled into it with the ease of someone who has sat in this chair many times before and knows exactly where to put his elbows. The fire in the small study had been built for warmth rather than light, and the room was amber and shadowed, the stacks of maps and books making shapes against the walls that were familiar from years of these conversations. "Ask what you want to ask," Aldrich said. "I want to understand what is happening," Cole said. "Not the facts of it, I have the facts. I want to understand what it means for the keep and for you." Aldrich looked at him for a moment. Cole was one of 3 people in the world he told the truth to without editing it first. "She is 9 years old," he said. "She has been entirely alone for 2 years. She spent 8 months researching me before she came. She chose this place and this person with more deliberateness than most adults bring to major decisions. She traveled 3 weeks on foot to get here. He paused, and her mother was Vera Lorne. Cole was quiet for a moment. He had not expected that. The woman from the eastern settlements, he said carefully. Yes, the one you. Yes, Cole sat with this. He was a man who understood when to push and when to let silence do the work, and this was a moment for silence. He looked at the fire. She gave the girl the cloth, he said. Yes, and she wrote something on it besides my name, 8 words. Aldrich looked at the window. I will not repeat them, but they are the reason I said yes today. You said yes, Cole confirmed. I said yes. Cole breathed in slowly through his nose. He was a practical man, and his mind was already moving through the practical dimensions of what this meant, the questions it would raise in the council, the conversations it would require with the senior staff, the adjustments to the daily structure of the keep. He was moving through these not because they were the most important things, but because they were the things he could help with, and helping was how he managed his own responses to significant events. The council will want to discuss it, he said. I know. They will say it complicates things. They will say more than that, Aldrich said. They will say it is dangerous to attach the king to a child from outside who arrived with no family and no documented origin and no verified claim to anything. They will say it opens questions about succession and about her safety and about whether someone sent her. They will say a great many accurate and reasonable things. And they will be right about the complications and wrong about the conclusion, Aldrich said. The complications are real. The conclusion they will reach from them is not. Cole looked at him. You are certain? It was not quite a question. I am certain, Aldrich said. I have been uncertain about a large number of things in my life, many of them important. I am not uncertain about this. Cole nodded. He accepted this in the way he accepted most things, Aldrich said, not blindly, but with the trust that comes from 15 years of watching a person make decisions and observing the quality of those decisions over time. The girl, Cole said, what is she like? Aldrich looked at the fire. He thought about how to answer this. She is like no one I have met, he said. She is 9 years old and she argues like a general and she looks at you like she is reading something written on the inside of your face. She's completely certain of everything she has decided and completely open about the things she is still deciding. He paused. She told me she wants to know if I am a good person, not whether I am powerful or whether I can protect her. Whether I am good. What did you tell her? That I would try to answer through behavior rather than words. Cole looked at him. She accepted that. She said it was the right answer. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then very slightly something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the territory around one. She sounds like trouble, he said. Almost certainly, Aldrich said, with something in his voice that was not quite anything Cole could name precisely but that he recognized. In the way you recognize music you have not heard for a long time. They sat in the comfortable, fire-lit silence of 2 people who have known each other long enough that silence is not uncomfortable. The house settled around them. Somewhere in the upper corridors, footsteps moved and faded. Vera Lorne, Cole said after a while, not pressing, just placing it in the room. Aldrich looked at the window. She was someone I knew in a different time, he said, before I was king, before everything that being king involves. We were in the eastern settlements for a long campaign and she was the person who reminded me what I was fighting for when I had started to forget. He stopped. She disappeared when I came back north. I looked for her, not for long enough. Looking back, I told myself she had moved on. She was careful about who she let close, and I thought it meant she had chosen not to be found. He was quiet. She was found, Cole said. By her own daughter, Aldrich said, coming to my gate 17 years later. The fire shifted. Something in a log gave way, and the flames rose briefly and then settled again. Nell has her eyes, Aldrich said. It was not something he had planned to say. It came out the way things come out when they have been sitting quietly inside you since morning, waiting for a private enough moment. Cole did not ask the question that was now clearly in the room. He understood that the question was one Aldrich needed to answer for himself in his own time, and that the answer would matter enormously, and that the space to arrive at it needed to be protected. What do you need from me? Cole said instead. I need you to arrange things so that she is comfortable and safe without making her feel managed, Aldrich said. She is perceptive and she does not like to feel handled. She has been managing herself for 2 years and she is very good at it. Do not undermine that, support it. Understood. I need the senior staff informed in a way that does not invite speculation about her origins. She is a child under the king's protection. That is the fact. The rest is not their concern. The council will push. Let them push, I will handle the council. And the girl herself, who will she answer to during the day? Aldrich thought about this. She will figure out most of it herself, he said, but she will need someone to show her how things work here without treating her like a guest or like a problem. Someone patient who is not intimidated by 9-year-olds who ask very direct questions. Cole considered. Myra, he said, she runs the household staff. She has children of her own, she is unflappable. Good, ask her. Done. Cole stood up. He went through the room's one available straight path to the door. At the door he stopped, hand on the frame. Sir, he said. Aldrich looked at him. The keep has been quieter than it should be, Cole said. He did not say for how long, he did not need to. This might be good for it. Aldrich looked at him for a moment. Go to bed, Cole, he said. Cole went. The keep was not, in fact, quiet that evening. Word had moved through it in the way that significant things move through enclosed places where people live closely together, gathering weight as it went. By the time the night watch changed, most of the people who lived and worked inside the stronghold walls had heard some version of the morning's events. In the kitchens, where the fire stayed hot late because there was always something that needed to be ready, the head cook told her 3 assistants what Percy had told her, and the assistants debated its significance with the kind of focus that people in kitchens bring to human drama, which is considerable. In the guard quarters, where the off-shift men sat with their boots off and their opinions on, the consensus was cautiously positive. Children were not a usual feature of the keep, but children were not threatening, and the unanimous verdict on the child in question, delivered by the gate guards who had seen her and confirmed by Percy who had brought her food, was that she was not like other children. She was described as serious by multiple sources who had only seen her briefly, and in the guards' quarters serious was a high compliment. In the north corridor, 2 of the older serving women whispered to each other in the way that women whisper when they are saying things out loud that they have been thinking quietly for a while. They talked about the room that had been prepared and the food that had been sent up, and the way the king had apparently gone to visit the girl in the evening, alone, without his captain, without any of the usual formal arrangements. They agreed that this meant something. They disagreed about what. Nell, in the east room with the garden window, heard none of this. She was sitting on the floor beside the bed with her back against its frame, which was where she had found herself again after the king left. The chair by the fire was more comfortable by every measurable standard, but she was not ready for the chair. The floor was concrete and comprehensible. It was the size and shape it was, and it did not change. She had the cloth unfolded in her lap. She was reading the 8 words again, though she did not need to. She knew them the way you know a song your mother used to sing, not just the words but the rhythm of them, the weight of them. He is someone who stays, her mother had written in the small pressed letters below the name. That was all, 7 words and the period that ended them. Nell folded the cloth and put it away. She thought about what the king had said and how he had said it, and how his face had looked when he read the cloth. She thought about the 8 words and what they meant, not just their meaning, but the fact that her mother, who was careful and quiet and did not say things that were not meant, had chosen those specific words and no others at the end of her strength. He is someone who stays. She had not understood when she first read it what it was measuring. She had read many things about Aldrich in 8 months of research, and she had looked as she told him for evidence that he kept his word, that he did not abandon what was his, that he made difficult decisions for right reasons. All of that she had found, but the 8 words were not about that. The 8 words were about something else, something smaller and more specific, something that had to do not with what a person does in battles or councils or decisions of power, but with what they do when the only person who needs them is one quiet child in a room. He stays. She put her hands flat on the floor and let the cold of the stone come up through her palms. She was very tired. She had been very tired for some time, but it was not the kind of tired that sleep fixed, or that rest fixed, or that fixed itself at all on its own. She thought it might be the kind of tired that fixed itself when you stopped having to carry everything by yourself. She got up from the floor. She looked at the bed for a moment. She pulled back the cover on one side, the side closest to the window, and she looked at it. Then she climbed in, which was more of an undertaking than she had expected because the bed was genuinely very high, and she lay down on her back with the cover pulled up and her eyes open and the firelight moving across the ceiling. She lay there for a while. Then, because she was 9 years old and had been walking for 3 weeks, and had made the most important decision of her life today, and eaten the first full meal she'd had in longer than she could clearly remember, she fell asleep. She did not move. She did not wake up when the fire burned down. She did not hear the keep settling around her, or the distant sound of the night watch calling to each other on the walls, or the wind that came off the mountain in the small hours and found its way through the old joints of the stone. She slept as though the bed was something she had always been entitled to. In the morning, when Dora came quietly to check on her, she found the girl on her back under the cover with her hands folded on her chest and her face completely still, and the room was cold because the fire had gone out, and the pale light of early dawn was coming through the garden window. Dora stood in the doorway for a moment, looking. Then she went and rebuilt the fire very quietly and left without waking her. She did not find out about the council until 4 days later. 4 days in which she mapped the stronghold with the same methodical attention she brought to everything, moving through it gradually, not all at once, starting with the corridors nearest the east room and working outward. She noted which corridors led to what. She noted which doors were always open, and which were sometimes closed, and which were always closed. She noted where people gathered in the mornings and where they ate their meals, and where the work of the keep actually happened versus where it appeared to happen from the outside. She was not doing this covertly. She was doing it openly, walking through the corridors during the hours she was not with Aldrich or with Myra. The household woman Cole had arranged for her, who had an organized mind and a pleasant way of explaining things, and who did not, as far as Nell could tell, feel any particular need to treat her as an oddity. Myra showed her where things were, and told her the names of things she asked about, and answered her questions without qualifying them with observations about her age or how unusual her questions were. This was, Nell found, very comfortable. She had spent 2 years dealing with people who responded to her questions with assessments of her ability to understand the answers. Myra did not do this. Myra treated her questions as questions and her answers as answers, which was how questions and answers were supposed to function, and which many adults apparently found difficult to do in the presence of a 9-year-old. On the 4th morning, Myra came to the east room and told her that the council had requested a meeting. "With me," Nell said. "With the king," Myra said. "Regarding you." Nell thought about this. Am I to be there? That is what the king would like to know. She considered it. She had known this meeting was coming. It had been implicit in everything since the war room, the careful way people moved around the subject of her presence, the slight formality that certain members of the senior staff brought to their interactions with her, the way questions about her were deflected rather than answered. The council was the organized version of what had been happening informally since her arrival. "Yes," she said, "I would like to be there." She found out later that when Myra relayed this, Aldrich had looked at her for a moment and then simply said to arrange it. He had not asked whether it was advisable or suggested that a 9-year-old's presence in a council meeting was unusual. He had treated it as a practical matter. She wanted to be there, so she would be there. The council chamber was in the center of the keep, a round room with a long oval table and 12 chairs around it and windows on 2 sides. When Nell came in with Aldrich, there were 7 people already seated, and they were doing the thing that people do when they have spent the 10 minutes before a meeting discussing the meeting. They were sitting with very neutral expressions that did not quite hide the fact that their minds were engaged. They were all older than her. This was not surprising, but it was worth noting. They ranged from perhaps 35 to a man at the far end who had to be at least 60, with white hair and an expression that suggested he had been forming opinions about things for a very long time and was now forming one about her. She sat in the chair Aldrich indicated to his left, and she put her hands on the table and looked at the council. They looked back. The questions came in the measured, careful language that people use when they have agreed in advance to be reasonable but are not entirely sure they mean it. Where had she come from? Who had verified her origins? What precisely was the king's intention regarding her status? Whether there were other family members who might have a claim? Whether the stronghold had the resources and the precedent to accommodate what was being proposed? She let Aldrich answer most of it. She had decided before she came in that she would speak only when she was asked a direct question or when something inaccurate was said. She was asked a direct question 12 minutes in. It came from the white-haired man, whose name was Ferris, and who had the particular confidence of someone who has outlasted several people who thought they knew better than him. "Child," he said, and the word had a slight edge that was not quite rude but was not quite respectful. "What exactly do you intend to gain from this arrangement?" She looked at him, she took one breath. "A home," she said, "and a person who will not leave." The room was quiet for a moment. "That is very simple," Ferris said. "Most true things are," she said. She heard to her left the quiet sound of Aldrich's breath, the sound she was beginning to learn that he made when something hit a target he hadn't expected. Ferris looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at the table, then he looked at Aldrich. Something shifted in his expression, not defeat exactly, but recalibration. "She will need formal documentation of status," he said finally, "and a clear structure for her education, and arrangements that can be explained to the territory." He was looking at his papers now, not at Nell. "These are achievable." It was not a welcome, but it was a concession, and Nell understood the difference. She did not smile. She looked at the table in front of her and let the meeting continue. Walking back from the council chamber afterward, she fell into step beside Aldrich in the corridor without planning to. He was half a step ahead of her, which was natural given the difference in their height and stride, but after a moment he slowed slightly so that they were walking at the same pace. She glanced at him. He was looking ahead. She looked ahead. "Ferris," she said, "he will come around." "Eventually," Aldrich said. "Probably 4 weeks," she said, "maybe 5. He looked down at her sideways briefly. "You are very specific." "I counted the number of times he looked at you to gauge your reaction versus the number of times he looked at me directly," she said. "He is deciding what to think of me based on what you think of me. Once he has decided you are serious, he will be serious too. That process takes approximately a month for someone like him." He was quiet for a moment. "Someone like him," he said. "Someone who has been the most experienced person in the room for a long time," she said. "He needs time to adjust when that changes." Aldrich was quiet for another moment. "I am glad," he said finally, "that you are on my side." She looked up at him. He was not looking at her anymore, but the corner of his mouth, the right corner, had done something very slight that she was nearly certain was the first version of a smile she had seen from him. She looked ahead again. "Yes," she said. "You should be." By the second week, she had located every exit. Not because she was planning to use them. She was not planning to use them. She had decided to stay, and decisions, in Nell's understanding, were not things you revisited every morning to check if they still felt right. Decisions were made, and then you lived inside them. But knowing where the exits were was a habit that had kept her alive for 2 years, and habits of that kind do not stop because the circumstances have changed. They continue running in the background the way a fire continues to warm a room even when you are not thinking about it. She knew the exits the same way she knew which corridors were drafty at night, and which servants arrived earliest, and which doors in the keep had locks that were heavier than others. She knew it because knowing things was how she managed being somewhere. The stronghold had 7 exits if you counted the wall routes, 4 if you counted only the ground-level ones, 2 if you counted only the ones that were not visible from any guard post. She noted this and filed it and did not think about it again. What she thought about more was the question of where things were put and why. This was something that interested her in a general way, the logic of why a place was arranged as it was, what the arrangement said about how the people inside it thought, what had been prioritized and what had been left as an afterthought. The stronghold had been built by someone with strong opinions about defensibility and almost no opinions about comfort, which was visible everywhere. The corridors were wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast carrying weapons. The ceilings were high. The floors were stone. The rooms were large. None of these things were about making the space pleasant to be in. They were about making the space function under pressure. She found this interesting. It told her something about the kind of place this had been before it was also the place she was living in. Myra was showing her the house records on the 9th morning, not because it was required, but because Nell had asked about them. and Myra had decided after approximately 36 hours that the most efficient approach to Nell was to answer her questions directly and let her follow the thread herself rather than trying to manage what she was exposed to. "The keep has been in continuous use for over 200 years, Myra said, unrolling a diagram on the table. "The original structure is here," she pointed to the center of the diagram, "and everything around it has been added at different points. You can tell by the thickness of the walls. The older sections have walls that are twice as thick as the newer ones." Nell studied the diagram. "Where are the oldest rooms?" "The East Tower, the war room, and the room you are sleeping in," Myra said. Nell looked at this. "My room is one of the oldest in the building." "Yes." She did not say anything to that, but she noted it, and later that evening she went back to the East room and stood in it and looked at the walls more carefully, the particular color of old stone, the way the corners met, the weight of the window frame. She put her hand flat against the wall beside the door and felt the cold coming through it, and thought about the fact that the wall was very thick, and that it had been very thick for 200 years, and that a great many things had happened on the other side of it, and the wall had stayed. She was not, she told herself, making anything symbolic out of a structural fact. She removed her hand from the wall and went to the window. There were things about the keep she was still getting used to. The food, which was regular and substantial and consistently more than she expected, was one. The warmth, which required her to make no effort, no finding of wood, no building of fires in the dark with wet hands, no going without because there was nothing to burn, was another. The bed, which she still climbed into each night with a slight sense of illegitimacy that she was working to address, was a third. She was also getting used to Aldrich. He was not easy to read. This was not because he was opaque. She had known opaque people, people who actively concealed themselves, and he was not that. He was more like a landscape that required time to understand. There were features of it that were obvious and immediate, and features that only became visible once you had been looking for a while. He was in the keep most days, moving between the war room and the council chamber and the south offices where the territorial records were kept, and she sometimes saw him in the corridors and sometimes did not, and when they saw each other they spoke if there was something to say and did not if there wasn't. This felt natural. She did not know how to explain why it felt natural, except that he had the same relationship to words that she did. He did not use them to fill space. On the 12th morning, she found him in the East Tower. She had not known he went there. She had been mapping the tower that morning, continuing her systematic survey of the keep, and she had climbed the stairs and pushed open the door at the top, and found him standing at the window looking out at the valley, his hands behind his back, his posture the particular posture of someone who is not thinking about their posture at all. He turned when the door opened. He looked at her. "I did not know you came here," she said. "Most mornings," he said. She came in and stood beside him at the window. The view was extraordinary. The valley below was white with frost, and the mountains beyond it were the color of storm clouds, and the sky above was the pale gray of early morning just starting to become blue. "You can see very far from here," she said. "Yes." "You can see where the road comes from." "Yes." She looked at the road. It was empty at this hour. It wound down from the gate in long, careful curves around the contours of the mountain, and at the bottom it straightened into the valley and ran east until it disappeared into the morning haze. She had walked that road. She had walked it from the other direction, coming up from the valley, 3 weeks of travel behind her, and she had looked up at the stronghold on the mountain and she had not paused. She had kept walking. She remembered the feeling of the road under her feet as the incline increased, and the way her legs had registered the additional effort without protest, because they had been registering effort for 3 weeks and had simply adjusted. She remembered the gates at the top, large and dark against the pale stone of the walls. She remembered looking up at the guards on the wall and feeling, very specifically, something that was not quite hope and not quite certainty, but that sat between them like something firm. "I can see from here where I came from," she said. He was looking at the same road, yes. She thought about saying something more. She did not. She stood at the window beside him and they both looked at the road for a while, and then the morning moved on and so did she. The chair was something that happened on the 15th day. She had not been sleeping in the bed. She had tried the first night and she had fallen asleep in it, which was success by one measure. But the next morning she had woken up on the floor. She had not been aware of moving. She had been in the bed and then she was on the floor, and she was not certain when the transition had happened or whether she had moved during the night or simply arranged herself on the floor without fully waking. She went back to the bed the second night. The same thing happened. By the third night she stopped trying the bed and began the night on the floor, and slept considerably better, which she understood was its own kind of information about herself. She had folded the blanket from the bed and placed it over the back of the chair, because she did not want anyone to think she was being difficult about the bed, and she slept on the floor with her coat under her head, and this worked well enough. On the 15th morning, Dora came in early to tend the fire as she always did. Nell was awake. She was sitting against the bed frame with her coat across her lap, looking at the door. Dora looked at the floor. She looked at the folded blanket on the chair. She looked at Nell. She did not say anything. She went and rebuilt the fire and left. That afternoon, Nell came back to the east room after her morning with Myra and found that a second chair had appeared. It was low and narrow, just larger than a child's chair, placed on the side of the room closest to the window. It had a cushion on it and a small folded blanket on the arm. There was no note, no explanation. The chair was simply there. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. She had told no one about the floor. Not Myra, not Percy, not Dora. She had assumed Dora had not mentioned it. She had told no one, and yet someone had noticed, and the response to noticing had been a chair, not a lecture about beds or a conversation about why she wasn't sleeping in the appropriate place. A chair. She crossed the room and sat in the chair. It was the right height. Her feet reached the floor. She sat in it and looked at the window and the garden below, and the afternoon light came through in the particular angle it came through at this time of day, and she thought about the fact that someone in this keep had looked at the way she was sleeping and concluded that what she needed was not to be corrected but to be accommodated. She sat in the chair for a long time. That evening, when she saw Aldrich in the corridor near the war room, she stopped and looked at him. He stopped and looked at her. "The chair," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "I would have used the bed eventually," she said. "I just needed time." "I know," he said again. "The chair is not instead of the bed, the chair is for now." She looked at him. There was something she wanted to say that she did not have the precise words for yet. She was aware of this as a gap, a feeling that exceeded her current vocabulary, which was a situation she handled by filing it and waiting for the words to arrive. "Thank you," she said. It was insufficient, but it was accurate. He nodded. He went back to what he had been doing. She went back to what she had been doing. But she thought about the chair for the rest of the evening, and about what it meant to have someone respond to the way you actually were rather than the way they expected you to be, and about the 8 words on the cloth, and about how evidence was not the same as knowing, and how knowing was not the same as the thing you felt in your chest when someone quietly placed a chair in your room while you were out. She did not have a word for that thing. She thought about it until she fell asleep in the chair, with the blanket across her lap and the fire low, and the garden outside the window dark and still. She slept without moving until morning. 3 days after the chair, Percy knocked on her door. He did this sometimes, not with the intention of delivering anything but with the intention of delivering information, which was a different thing and which he had apparently decided was his particular contribution to the East Room's daily operation. He arrived with the kind of focused energy that 11-year-olds bring to things they find interesting, and he stayed for as long as it took to discharge whatever he had come to say, and then he left. Today he had come to tell her that there was a new horse in the stable. "She arrived this morning," he said, standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. "Someone brought her from the Western Farms. She is brown with a white mark here." He touched his own forehead. "And she is difficult. She kicked at Emery twice." "Who is Emery?" Nell asked. She was sitting in the low chair. "The head stableman. He has been here 15 years, and he says she is the most stubborn horse he has dealt with." Percy paused. "I thought you might want to see her." "Why me specifically?" "Because you are also stubborn," Percy said, with the absolute directness of someone who has not yet learned to filter this quality, and stubborn things sometimes understand each other. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back with that frank, round face and the expression of someone who has said something accurate and is not sure whether it will be received as an insult or a compliment. "What time does Emery take his morning break?" she asked. Percy's face broke into something that was unmistakably satisfaction, Second hour after sunrise. Then that is when I will go, she said. She went the following morning during Emery's break, when the stable was quiet except for the sounds of animals and the particular smell that stables have, hay and animal warmth, and something that was not quite clean but was not unpleasant either, something organic and uncomplicated. The brown horse was at the far end, in a stall by herself. Nell stood outside the stall and looked at her. The horse looked back. She was indeed brown, a deep warm brown, with a diagonal white mark above her right eye that went from the hairline down to the bridge of the nose. She was not a large horse. She had the kind of build that suggested speed rather than strength, and she had the kind of eyes that horses have when they have been through things and are no longer very interested in performing calm. Nell stood there for a long time without approaching. The horse watched her. After about 4 minutes the horse turned her head slightly, not away, just at a different angle, still watching but slightly less directly, which in Nell's reading of the situation meant something. She did not reach into the stall, she did not speak. She stayed where she was and let the horse continue to look at her and looked back and waited. After 12 minutes, the horse took one step toward the front of the stall. Nell stayed still. The horse took another step. She was close enough now that Nell could see the small muscle movement along her jaw that horses do when they are deciding something. The horse looked at her face, and Nell looked back, and she had the particular sensation of being assessed by a creature that had very good reasons to be cautious, and was choosing, despite those reasons, to come a little closer. She lifted her left hand very slowly and held it out, palm up, against the front of the stall. The horse looked at the hand. One breath, too. The horse pressed her nose into Nell's palm. Percy, who had come to watch from a careful distance, took in a quiet breath. He let it out slowly. Emery, who had come back early from his break because he had left his gloves, stood at the stable entrance and watched a 9-year-old girl stand motionless, while his most difficult horse pressed its face into her hand like something it had decided to do. He stood very still, the way experienced people stand when they are watching something they do not want to interrupt. She did not name the horse that day. She came back the next morning and the morning after that, and on the 4th morning the horse accepted a piece of apple from her hand, and on the 7th morning she let Nell run her hand along her neck without moving away. Emery watched all of this without saying much, which Nell had decided was evidence of a sensible man. On the 8th morning, as she was leaving the stable, she ran into Aldrich coming in. He was not in his formal clothes. He came to the stable in the morning sometimes, she had learned, not every morning, but often enough that his presence there was not unusual. He came with the ease of someone who had grown up around horses and had not lost the habit. He looked at her, he looked at the direction she had come from. "The brown horse," he said. "Yes," she said. "Emery told me you had made progress with her." "She is not difficult," Nell said. "She is careful, there is a difference." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "there is." She looked up at him. She had been thinking over the past several days about something she wanted to ask him. She had been waiting for a moment that felt right, and this moment, in the plain early light of the stable yard with no one else immediately present, felt right. "Did you place the chair," she said, "or did you ask someone else to?" He looked at her. "I placed it," he said. "You came into the room while I was out?" "Yes, without telling me first." "Yes." A pause. "Does that bother you?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said, "but I wanted to know whether it was your decision or someone else's." "It was mine." She nodded. She had thought it was. She had wanted to confirm it. "Why does it matter?" he asked. She looked at the stable entrance, thinking about how to say this accurately. "Because it tells me something about how you respond to information," she said. "Someone told you something or you noticed something, and instead of asking me about it or suggesting I change, you just did a thing that would help. That is a particular way of thinking." She looked up at him. "I wanted to know it was yours." He held her gaze for a long moment. "It is mine," he said. She nodded again. She said good morning and walked back toward the keep, and he went into the stable and the morning continued. She could feel him watching her go for a few steps, not in a way that was uncomfortable but in a way that was attentive, the way a person watches something they are paying genuine attention to. She did not turn around. She had enough. On the 20th day, she learned that the council had voted formally on her status. She learned this not from Aldrich and not from Cole but from Ferris, which surprised her. He found her in the corridor outside the council chamber alone, which she assumed was not accidental. He was tall for his age, which was considerable, and he had the kind of bearing that came from a lifetime of being the person in the room who expected to be listened to. He looked at her in the corridor, and she looked back at him. "The vote was 7 in favor, none against," he said. She calculated, "That is the whole council." Yes, he paused. He was doing the thing she had seen him do in the meeting room, looking at a point slightly past her, forming something, deciding whether to deliver it. "For what it is worth," he said, "I was the last vote, not because I was opposed. Because I wanted to be certain I was not being hasty." She looked at him. "And are you certain?" "Sufficiently," he said, and something in his voice was not quite warmth but was adjacent to it, the way some very old materials are adjacent to warmth without quite being soft. "You argue like someone who was trained by people who did not tolerate imprecision." "I taught myself," she said. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, not condescension. Something that recognized a thing it had not anticipated. "Yes," he said, "I think you probably did." He walked away down the corridor. She watched him go. She thought 3 weeks, not 4. Then she walked back to the east room, where the low chair waited with its blanket on the arm, and she sat in it, and she looked at the garden, and she allowed herself, for the first time since arriving, to think about what the word permanent meant, and whether it might apply, and what it would feel like if it did. It felt like a wall, she thought, a warm one, the kind that catches rather than blocks. She sat with that until the light changed. They came in the 3rd week. Not from the front, that was the first thing to understand. The gate was locked, the guards were at their posts, the walls were watched. The front was not where they came from, because whoever planned this understood the front and planned around it, which meant this was not random. This was specific. This was someone who had studied the stronghold the way Nell had studied Aldrich, except with the opposite intention. She was in the east room at the time. She was in the low chair, reading. Myra had found her a book about territorial maps that she had been working through with the methodical attention she brought to anything that increased her understanding of where she was and where everything else was relative to it. The fire was low. The garden below the window was dark. It was the 2nd hour after the evening meal, the quiet hour when the keep settled into the kind of stillness that comes after the day's work is done. She heard them before she saw anything. Not footsteps exactly. A quality of sound that was wrong, a careful quality, the particular silence of movement that is working very hard not to be heard. She had learned this kind of sound in the river towns, in the settlements, in the 2 years of sleeping in places where the wrong footstep outside the door could mean the difference between continuing and not. She had learned to hear the effort in silence. She put the book down. She looked at the door. She calculated what she knew. The east room was at the end of a corridor that had only one approach from the main keep, and a second approach from the old service stairs that Nell had located on day 4 of her mapping. The service stairs were not on the current guard rotation because they were in the oldest part of the building and had been judged structurally narrow enough to require only occasional inspection. This was a gap she had noted and had, 3 days ago, considered mentioning to Cole. She had not yet done so. She heard the sound again, service stairs. She moved. She did not run for the door because the door was the direction the sound was coming from. She went to the window. The garden below was a single-story drop. She had noted this on day 2, not safe exactly but possible. She had been doing possible things for 2 years. She lifted the window. The cold came in immediately, the night air sharp with the mountain cold that had been there all week. She looked down. The garden path was a pale stripe in the dark below. She heard the sound at the end of the corridor. She went out the window. She dropped and landed on the path, the impact going up through her legs in the particular way that drops do when you land correctly, bending immediately, not straight, the way she had learned from watching other people fall and noticing which of them got up. She came up in a crouch, listening. Above her, through the open window, she heard the east room door open. She did not wait to hear anything else. She moved through the garden toward the gate in the far wall, which she had located on day 2 and which she had tested 3 days later, walking through it to see where it led. It led to the outer service yard, which led to the stable yard, which was well lit at night because of the animals. She went through the gate and across the service yard and into the stable, and she found the night stable hand, a young man named Rolf who had the permanent, slightly startled expression of someone who worked nights. And she told him, very clearly in short sentences, that there were people in the East Corridor who should not be there, and she needed him to take her to wherever the night guard reported. Rolf stared at her. "Now," she said. He moved. The rest of it happened in the compressed, efficient way that prepared places respond when activated. Rolf took her to the night guard post. The night guard took her to Cole, who had not yet gone to sleep because Cole operated on what appeared to be approximately 4 hours of sleep, and spent the rest of the time doing something that looked like reading but was functionally monitoring. Cole heard what she said in 30 seconds and had people moving in 45. They found 2 men in the East Corridor. A third was located on the roof of the East Tower, which suggested someone had come over the wall at the point where the old section met the newer construction, and the join in the stone created a surface that was climbable if you knew where to put your hands. Someone had known where to put their hands. Nell stood in the stable yard while all of this happened. She was cold. She had come out the window in her indoor clothes without her coat, and the mountain air at night was well below the point at which standing still in it was comfortable. She was aware of being cold in the detached way she became aware of physical discomfort when something more urgent was occupying her attention. She stood and she thought. She thought about the gap in the guard rotation, which she had identified and not reported, and about the service stairs, and about the join in the old wall, and about whether the people who had come tonight had arrived with specific information, or had arrived with enough general expertise to find these things themselves. She thought about the third person on the roof, which was a position that made sense if you were covering an exit, which meant they had expected movement, which meant they had known which room she was in. She thought about what that meant. Aldrich arrived in the stable yard. He came out of the east entrance of the keep at a pace that was not quite running, but that covered ground the way running does. Cole was with him. He crossed to where she was standing, and he looked at her from head to feet in the way that people look when they are establishing that a person is physically intact. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. He looked at her for another moment, as though checking his own assessment against hers. "You are cold." "Yes," she said. "I came out the window without my coat." He took off the outer layer. He was wearing a heavy dark jacket and held it out. She put it on. It came down past her knees and the sleeves went well beyond her hands. She pushed them up. "The East Room window," he said. "You went out the window." "It was a single-story drop," she said. "It was the direction away from the sound." He looked at her. "You have been assessing the exits." "I assess exits in every place I am," she said. "I located that one on the second day." She paused. "I also located the service stairs and the wall join. I was going to tell Cole about the guard rotation gap. I should have done it earlier." "Yes," he said, "you should have." His voice was flat, not harsh. She heard the weight in it, not anger, but something underneath anger, something that preceded it. "I was not certain the information was significant enough to prioritize," she said. "I miscalculated." "You did," he said. They looked at each other. "I will not do it again," she said. He held her gaze for another second, then he looked at Cole. "3 people," he said. "3 confirmed. We are checking the rest of the perimeter." Cole had the particular calm of someone who has been trained to manage crises and is currently managing one without enjoying it. 2 in the corridor, 1 on the roof. The one on the roof is talking. "Already?" "He is cold," Cole said, "and he does not appear to be particularly committed to the cause he was sent for." "What cause?" Aldrich said. Cole glanced at Nell briefly. Aldrich looked at her. She looked back. She was 9 years old and standing in a stable yard in the middle of the night in an oversized jacket after going out a window and walking through the cold, and she was looking at him with the same direct, focused attention she had used from the gate on the first morning. "Tell me," she said. "You may know something about this," Cole said carefully. "That would help us understand why you were the target." "I may," she agreed. Cole looked at Aldrich. Aldrich nodded. "The man on the roof says they were sent by a party in the Eastern Territories," Cole said. "He says they were given one instruction to bring the child back, not harm her, bring her." Nell thought about this. "Bring me back," she said. "Not harm me. That is what he says." which means someone in the Eastern Territories knows I am here and wants me returned, not dead, returned, she thought for a moment. What I know is not something you can use if I am dead. It is only useful if I am alive. Cole and Aldrich both looked at her. I have something that someone needs, she said. I knew this in a general way. I did not know it had become specific enough to send people here. She paused. There is more to what I saw, what my mother told me I saw as a very small child before I was old enough to understand it, than I have told you. Aldrich looked at her steadily. I know, he said. She blinked. You know. I suspected, he said, from the beginning. A child with no documented origin arrives with a cloth bearing my name, and someone sends 3 people over my walls to retrieve her 6 weeks later. This is not about the cloth. She was quiet. She was recalculating rapidly the things she had told him and the things she had held back and the things that the events of this evening had changed. I was waiting until I was certain you were safe to tell, she said. He looked at her, safe for me to know or safe for you to tell. She thought about this honestly, both, she said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked at the keep, at the lit windows of the east corridor above them, and he made a decision in the way she had watched him make decisions, not fast, not slow, but with a particular quality of stillness that preceded the answer. Inside, he said, the fire room, not the east room. We will sit and you will tell me everything, all of it, from the beginning. She looked up at him. Yes, she said. She walked with him back into the keep, his jacket still around her shoulders, and behind them Cole directed 4 guards to take the 3 captured men somewhere secure and warm enough that they would keep talking. And in the stable Rolf stood in the doorway watching them go, still wearing the slightly startled expression that was apparently permanent. She thought, walking across the stone floor toward the fire room, she should have told him sooner. She had been waiting for the right moment, protecting information the way she always protected information, holding it close until she was certain. This was habit. This was survival behavior. But she was not surviving anymore. She was somewhere specific with someone specific, and the information she was carrying was not hers alone to carry, because the keep and everyone in it had now been put at risk for it. That changed the calculation. She had been thinking like someone who was alone. She was not alone. This was new. It was going to require a different way of thinking. She registered this as a concrete fact about her current situation and filed it and kept walking. The fire room was warm. Someone had already added to the fire before they arrived, which meant Cole or Aldrich had given a signal she had not noticed. The room had 2 chairs and a low table and a lamp, and when she sat down in the smaller chair and looked across the table at him, she took a breath, and she began at the very beginning, and she did not hold anything back. She started with her mother. Not with the fever, not with the cloth, not with the research. She started much further back, with what she actually knew about Vera Lorne before she became the woman who lay in a narrow bed and put 8 words onto a piece of cloth for her daughter to carry. Her mother had not always been in the eastern settlements. She had come there from somewhere else. This was one of the things she had told Nell in the long, careful conversations of the illness, when there was finally enough time and enough need to say things that had been stored for a long time. She had come from a settlement in the Northern Territories, near the old trade roads, and she had worked there as a record keeper for a merchant company that moved goods between the northern and eastern regions. She saw something, Nell told Aldrich, at one of the trade stations. She was doing records, counting goods, and she saw something pass through the station that was not in the records, something significant. What kind of something? Aldrich said. He was leaning slightly forward with his forearms on the table. Documents, Nell said. Sealed documents moving through the station in a false-bottomed crate, addressed to people she recognized, people in government positions. She paused. She recognized the seals. She knew what seals looked like because she handled official documents every day. These seals were the wrong kind for where they were going. They were military seals on what was listed as a merchant shipment. Aldrich's expression did not change dramatically. It tightened slightly around the eyes. She did not report it immediately, Nell continued. She thought about it for 3 days, and then she went to report it, and the man she was going to report it to was one of the names on the documents. A silence. So she left, Aldrich said. She left that night, Nell said. She took nothing, she moved east. She eventually ended up in the settlements, far enough from the trade roads that she thought it was safe. Another pause. She was wrong in the end, but it took them a long time to find her. Years. They found her. She believed so, Nell said. The fever was real, people did die from it in the settlement. But she also believed that someone had come before the fever asking questions about who lived in the settlement and what their histories were. She looked at the fire. She may have been wrong, she was very ill and her thoughts were not always clear, but she believed it. And before she died, Aldrich said slowly, she told you all of this. As much as she could, Nell said, and she told me what I had seen as a small child when I was perhaps 4 or 5. I had no memory of it, I was too young, but she told me that I had been with her at the trade station one day when she stayed late to finish a count, and I had been sitting in a corner playing and I had seen the crate opened. I had seen the documents and the seals. She looked at him. I was old enough to remember a picture, she said, not to understand it, but to remember it. A picture, Aldrich said. A specific seal, Nell said. She told me what it looked like. She described it to me until I could see it in my mind. She paused. And she told me that this specific seal, on a document in the wrong place at the wrong time, connected to the names she had seen, was evidence of something that certain people would very much like to stay buried. And that the only person she trusted with this information, the only person she believed could actually do something with it and survive the doing, was the person whose name was on the cloth. Aldrich sat back. He sat back and he looked at the ceiling for a moment and he breathed carefully. She watched him process this, watched the thinking happen in his face in the same way she watched horses decide things, the small muscle movements around the jaw and the eyes that meant the mind was working. The seal, he said, can you describe it? Yes, she said, it is a double ring with a symbol in the center. My mother called it a split star. 6 points, but the top 2 are separated by a gap, which is not how formal seals are usually designed. She said it was a private seal, not an official one, which is how she knew it did not belong on what it was marking. Aldrich looked at her steadily. He was very still. You recognize it, she said. Yes, he said. She waited. I have seen that seal twice, he said, both times in circumstances that did not make full sense to me at the time. I did not know it was private. I assumed it was a regional designation I was not familiar with. He paused. I know now from other intelligence that has come in over the past year that there is a group operating across the northern and eastern territories who have been working to move influence and resources in ways that do not go through official channels. We have been watching them. We have not had enough to act. My mother's account would be enough, Nell said. Her account would be a beginning, he said. Your account of the seal, a child who saw it at a specific location on a specific date, combined with what we already have. He stopped. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him before, something that combined the careful assessment she was used to from him with something else, something that was almost reluctant in its recognition. You understood all of this. I understood that I had something important, she said. I did not know exactly what shape it was until tonight. She looked at him. I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. You needed to be sure, he said. I needed to be sure, she agreed. That is not an excuse. It is an explanation. They are different. He nodded once. From now on, he said, if you have information that relates to your safety or to the safety of this keep, you tell me. Not when you have decided the moment is right, when you have it. Yes, she said. This is a condition, he said, not a preference. I understand, she said. He looked at her for a moment. His expression was not angry. It was the expression of a person setting something down clearly so that it could not be misunderstood. She met it. You are not in trouble, he said. You made the decisions you made based on how you have had to live for 2 years, and those decisions were reasonable given what you knew, but what you know has changed. What I know has changed, she agreed. You are not alone, he said. That changes the calculation. She looked at him. He had said, nearly word for word, what she had been thinking on the walk across the stone floor from the stable yard. I know, she said. Do you? He said, not harshly, just checking, the way you check something you want to be real. She thought about the chair in the east room. She thought about the jacket around her shoulders which she was still wearing. She thought about the morning in the east tower and the 8 words on the cloth and the boy Percy who came to her door with information he thought she should have, and the woman Myra who answered her questions without qualifying them, and the horse in the stable who had pressed her nose into Nell's palm because Nell had stood still long enough. Yes, she said, I know. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he sat back and his expression shifted back into the working mode she knew better, practical, forward-looking, already moving toward what came next. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I want you to sit with Cole and tell him everything you told me plus anything you did not tell me. Every detail. The location of the trade station, the date, the names your mother told you, all of it." "I will," she said. "Tonight, you will sleep somewhere other than the East Room until we have confirmed the perimeter is clear." "Where?" He thought for a moment. "The room beside the fire room," he said. "It is close to the guard post and it has no outside window." A pause. "It does, however, have a proper bed." She looked at him. "The floor in that room," he said carefully, "is not particularly comfortable. I mention this not as a suggestion but as a fact." The corner of her mouth did something involuntary. She held it still, but it had already happened. "I will manage," she said. "I know you will," he said, and in his voice was something that was not quite a smile either but occupied the same space. The interrogation of the three men took 4 days. Nell was not present for most of it. This was Cole's decision, arrived at and communicated to her directly, without framing it as protection. "The information we are gathering from them may be incomplete or deliberately misleading," he told her, "and I do not want you constructing your understanding of the situation around testimony that has not been verified. When we have something confirmed, I will bring it to you." She found this reasonable and said so, and she spent the 4 days doing the other things that needed doing. She sat with Cole each morning, as Aldrich had instructed, and she told him everything her mother had described. She had known that the act of saying it out loud to someone who was writing it down and asking follow-up questions would change her relationship to the information, and it did. Things she had been carrying as pictures, the way her mother had described the trade station, the layout of the room, the sound of the crate being opened, became something more concrete when they had to be translated into words precise enough for someone else to use. The process made them more real. Cole was precise and patient. He asked exactly the right questions. He did not ask her to interpret what she had been told, he asked her to describe it. He recorded the descriptions and did not tell her what he thought of them until the second day, when he put his pen down and looked at the table and said, "The location your mother described, the trade station near the junction of the eastern and northern roads, matches a station that was officially decommissioned 12 years ago." Nell thought about this. "Decommissioned after she left," she said. "Approximately 3 months after, based on the records." "Someone closed it," she said, "after she reported what she had seen." "Or did not report but ran," Cole said carefully. "The closing could have been precautionary, removing a site where something had gone wrong, or it could be coincidental." "How likely is coincidence?" "Less likely than the alternative," he said. She nodded. They went back to work. On the 3rd day, something happened that changed the shape of what they were dealing with. It happened in the war room, which had been set up as the center of the investigation. She was not there when it happened. She was in the library, reading, which was one of the activities Myra had arranged for her in the mornings as part of what was being called her education, but which felt more like the organized version of what she had already been doing on her own. She was working through a history of the territorial boundaries when Percy appeared in the doorway. Percy, when he arrived at a room, was usually in a state of measured excitement, the way people are when they have information they believe to be significant. He was in that state now, but there was something under it that was different from usual, a tightness that made him look slightly younger than 11. "Cole says you should come to the war room," he said. "The king is already there." She put the book down. The war room had 5 people in it when she arrived. Aldrich at the table, Cole beside him, 2 senior guards she recognized from the morning rotations, and a man she had not seen before who was sitting in the chair across from Aldrich, with the posture of someone who has decided that cooperation is the better option compared to whatever the alternative is. This was the 3rd man, the one from the roof. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 25, with a thin face and the particular look of someone who had been cold and uncomfortable for several days and had done a great deal of thinking during that time. He looked at her when she came in. She looked at him. "This is Nell," Aldrich said, not explaining, just naming. The young man looked at her for a moment and then looked at the table. Something in his face was not hostile. It was something closer to complicated. "He has given us the name of the person who sent them," Cole said to her, "and the reason they wanted you brought back." She sat in the chair Aldrich indicated. She put her hands on the table and looked at the man. "Tell me what you told them," she said. The young man, his name, it emerged, was Tom, a name that fit him poorly in the same way that straightforward names sometimes sit oddly on people who have done crooked things, told her. He had been recruited 18 months ago. He was not, he said, primarily a person who did this kind of thing. He was a former road courier who had fallen into bad debt and had been offered a way out. He told this part in the clipped tone people use for the parts of their own story that they are least proud of. He had worked for the organization for 18 months, doing small tasks before this one. This task had been specific. He had been told about a child. He had been told that the child had information that belonged to the organization, not dangerous information. The man who hired him had said just information that had been mishandled, that had ended up in the wrong place, that needed to come back. He had been told that the child would not be harmed. He had been told that she would be brought to a specific location and given to specific people, and that would be the end of it. He did not sound, telling this, as though he had believed it entirely at the time. He sounded like a person who had believed enough of it to do the thing, which was a different and more uncomfortable position to occupy. "The specific location," Aldrich said, "where is it?" The young man told them. It was a settlement 3 days east of the stronghold, at the edge of the territory boundary. Not inside Lycan territory, not quite outside it either, in the gray area that territorial boundaries always had, the place where jurisdiction was a matter of interpretation. Cole had been writing. He stopped and looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at the map on the wall. "The person who sent them," Nell said. She was looking at Tom. "You said you know his name." "I know the name I was given," Tom said carefully. "Whether it is his real name, that I cannot say." "Tell me the name," she said. He told her. She did not recognize it, but she watched Aldrich's face when it was said, and she watched Cole's face, and the controlled stillness in both of them was the kind that meant recognition. "You know that name," she said. Aldrich looked at her. "We know of it," he said. "We have not been able to confirm the person behind it." "He is connected to the seal," she said. It was not a question. She was watching his expression confirm it before he spoke. "We believe so," Cole said. "Based on what this man has told us and what we already had, we believe that the name and the seal are connected to the same network, the network your mother witnessed 11 years ago." Nell sat with this. The network her mother had seen evidence of, had run from, had eventually lost her life because of, directly or indirectly, the fever or what had come before it was still active. 11 years later. In a different form, probably with different people in different positions, but with the same structure and the same interests. And it wanted her back, not dead back. Because she could identify the seal. Because she was, she now understood, the only living person who had been at that trade station on that day, as a small child with the ability to identify a specific mark, and place it at a specific location on a specific date, and who had survived, and who had found her way to the one person capable of doing something with the testimony. Her mother had understood this. That was why she had chosen the name on the cloth, not just because he was someone she trusted, because he was the right person to receive what Nell was carrying. She sat very still at the table. "They will try again," she said. "Yes," Aldrich said. "Not with 3 people next time." "No," he agreed. She looked at the map on the wall. She had spent several mornings studying that map with the same attention she had given to the house records. She knew the distances on it, the positions of the settlements, the places where the territory boundary was definite, and the places where it was less so. "The settlement where they wanted to take me," she said. "It is at the edge of the territory." "Yes," Cole said. "Which means they have people positioned there already. Waiting. Likely." She was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about something specific, a connection that had formed while Tom was talking, between something he had said and something she had read in the territorial history that morning. "The old road through the boundary zone," she said. "It runs through that settlement. It is the only road that connects the eastern approach to the northern trading routes without passing through a checkpoint." Cole looked at her sharply. "That road," she said, "would allow someone to move things between the eastern territories and the north without official documentation." She looked at the map. "Is it still in use?" Cole and Aldrich exchanged a look. We have been monitoring it for 6 months, Cole said. We have not had authority to close it because it serves legitimate traffic as well. But if you could demonstrate that it is being used for the movement of sealed documents between parties who are coordinating to undermine official structures, Nell said, you would have authority. Yes, Cole said. And my testimony, together with what you already have, together with what this man has told you. Nell, Aldrich said. She looked at him. You do not need to build the case, he said. That is not your work. She looked at him steadily. I know it is not my work in the sense that I am not a general or a counsel, but it is my testimony, it is my mother's account, and I want to understand what it means and where it leads. She paused. I have been carrying this for a long time. I would like to know what I have been carrying. He held her gaze. Fair, he said, and he turned to Cole and told him to bring the territorial records and everything they had on the boundary road, and Cole sent one of the senior guards to fetch them. And for the next 2 hours the war room became what it was built for, a place where difficult information was worked with seriously, by people who understood what was at stake. Nell was one of those people. She sat at the table across from the man named Tom, who was still there because they had not yet decided what to do with him, and she asked him careful questions about the route he had taken to arrive at the stronghold, and she cross-referenced his answers against the map, and she found 2 gaps in the information that she pointed out to Cole, who added them to the notes. At some point Percy appeared in the doorway with a tray of tea, looked at the room, absorbed the situation and set the tray down without comment and left. She appreciated this. At the end of the 2 hours, Aldrich stood and thanked Tom for his cooperation, and told Cole to make sure he was comfortable. Tom stood and looked at Nell once more before he was taken out, and the look was the same complicated one he had given her when she came in, not hostile, not apologetic, just complicated, the look of a person trying to place a thing in a category that does not quite fit any of the ones he has. When the room was just the 2 of them and Cole, Aldrich looked at the table covered with papers and map notes, and said nothing for a moment. There is enough to act, Cole said. Yes, Aldrich said. The timing will need to be right, Cole said. If we move too soon, we signal that we have more than we have. If we wait. They come again, Nell said. They come again, Cole confirmed. Aldrich looked at the map. He was in the stillness before a decision. She had learned to recognize it. We move in 10 days, he said. Enough time to set this correctly, not enough time for them to regroup. Cole nodded. He began collecting the papers with the economy of someone who already knows what the next 12 tasks are. Nell, Aldrich said. She looked at him. You will tell me what you intend to do in the next 10 days before you do it, he said, not after. Yes, she said. Including any information you currently have that we have not discussed. She thought about this honestly. She ran through everything her mother had told her, everything she had gathered, everything that had been sitting in the back of her mind since arriving. She found 2 small things she had not yet mentioned, small but possibly useful. I have 2 more things, she said. I was going to bring them up when they became relevant. Aldrich looked at her. They are relevant now, he said. Yes, she said, I see that. She told him. The 2 additional things she told him were these. First, her mother had not only seen the documents at the trade station, she had read them. Not entirely, she had not had enough time, and they had been in a language that mixed official notation with a private shorthand she could not fully decode, but she had read enough to know the direction of the correspondence. She had told Nell that the documents were planning documents, not reporting ones. They were written in anticipation of something rather than record of something. The event they were anticipating was connected to a transfer of territorial authority, a formal mechanism that would shift governance of a region from one administrative structure to another, and which required specific conditions to be met and specific procedures to be followed. The documents were discussing how those conditions could be made to appear met without actually being met. Cole stopped writing when she reached this part. He looked at Aldrich. Aldrich did not look back, he was looking at Nell. Which region, he said. She did not know, Nell said. She could not read that part of the shorthand, but she described the general language as the kind used for border-adjacent territories. Places where the question of which larger structure had ultimate authority was not fully settled. The boundary zone, she thought. She saw the same thought move through Aldrich's face. The second thing, he said. Second, her mother had kept something. This was the thing Nell had been most uncertain about revealing, because she had not been sure, until sitting in this room for the past 2 hours, and watching how the information she had already given fit together with what they already knew, whether it was real or the product of a sick and frightened woman's mind trying to give her daughter more than she actually had to give. Her mother had kept a notation. Not the documents, she had not taken the documents, which would have been impossible to explain and impossible to carry without being stopped. But she had kept a notation of the date, the station location, the number of documents in the crate, and the shorthand marks she had been able to read. She had kept it in a form that Nell had believed for 2 years was simply a piece of paper with her mother's handwriting, dates, figures, nothing that had meant anything to her as a child or as a traveling 9-year-old. She reached inside her coat. She had been carrying it since the settlements. It was folded inside the lining of her coat, behind the piece of cloth, in the seam pocket she had sewn there herself because she had nowhere else to put things that needed to stay dry and undisturbed. She brought it out and put it on the table. It was a small piece of paper, worn at the folds, the handwriting on it the same careful handwriting as the cloth, small, pressed together, conserving space. Numbers, dates, and several marks that she had never been able to interpret. Cole picked it up. He looked at it. He looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at it. She watched both of them read the marks. She watched Cole's expression do something that his professional calm did not completely conceal. She watched Aldrich go still in the specific way he went still when something important was happening. These marks, Cole said, he pointed at 3 of them. These are not shorthand. These are the official notation used by the Territorial Bureau of Transfers. I know them because I spent 3 years working in the Eastern Bureau before I came here. Nell had not known that about Cole. What do they say? She asked. They reference a case number, Cole said. He was looking at the paper with the concentrated attention of someone who is solving something in real time. A case number in the Bureau's notation system corresponds to a file, a pending action, something that has been formally opened but not yet closed. He looked up. If this case number is still in the Bureau's records, it can be accessed. It can be cross-referenced with the documents they hold on file for transfers in that period. And if the transfer was planned to appear legitimate when it was not, Nell said, there would be a discrepancy between what the file shows and what actually happened. Yes, Cole said. And that discrepancy, combined with my testimony about the seal and the date and location, would provide. Nell, Aldrich said. She stopped. He was looking at her with that expression again, the one she had seen the first day in the war room when she had laid out her papers and he had read them, the one that recognized something it had not anticipated. Where did you learn to think like this? He said. She considered, from necessity, she said, and from reading whatever I could find. She paused. And possibly from having a mother who understood how systems worked and talked to me about them even when she thought I was too young to follow. She looked at the paper on the table. I followed more than she knew. He held her gaze for a long moment. The case number, Cole said. He was still looking at the paper. I can send to the Bureau through an intermediary. If we do it carefully, it will not signal that we have it. We can compare what comes back against the other documents without showing our hand. Do it, Aldrich said. Cole left the room with the paper, carefully, the way you carry something that has been waiting a long time to be useful. The war room was quiet. The lamp on the table burned steadily. The maps on the wall were exactly as they had been 2 hours ago, but the room felt different. It felt, she thought, the way rooms feel when something has shifted in them, when the thing being worked on has become clearer, when the shape of the problem has resolved into something that has a solution. I should have given you the paper on the first day, she said. You did not know what it was, Aldrich said. I suspected it was significant, she said. I just did not know how. Nell, he leaned forward slightly. You are 9 years old. You have been carrying your mother's work across 2 years and 200 miles, alone, without any way of knowing who to trust with it. The fact that you arrived here at all, with this intact, he gestured at the space where the paper had been, is not something that requires you to apologize for the timing. She looked at the table. I am trying to learn, she said, the difference between being careful and being alone. They felt the same for a long time. They did, he said, they are not. She looked up at him. "I know," she said. He sat back, he looked at the maps on the wall. She looked at them too, at the line that marked the territory boundary, and the settlement beyond it where Tom had been told to take her, and the road that connected the eastern and northern routes, and the case that was now more than a child with a cloth and a name, now a thing with teeth, with documents and testimony and evidence, with the weight of 11 years of what her mother had carried and what she had carried in her mother's absence. "When this is finished," she said, "what happens to Tom?" He looked at her. "Why?" "He cooperated," she said. "He told you where and who and why. He did not have to." "He did not have a great deal of leverage," Aldrich said. "He still had the option to say nothing," she said. "People do that. It is harder to cooperate when you are afraid of what happens to you if the people you worked for find out you cooperated." She paused. "I am not arguing for leniency. I am noting the specific thing he did that was useful and asking what is being considered." He looked at her for a long moment. "What would you suggest?" he said. She thought about this with her usual deliberateness. "He is not a person who makes a career of bad work," she said. "He is a person who made bad choices under pressure. Those are different. He has information that may continue to be useful, and he has no particular loyalty to the people who sent him since they sent him to do something that was apparently not what he was told it would be." She paused. "He would be more useful as a source than as a problem." "A source," Aldrich said. "He moves through the territory. He knows routes and contacts and the kind of small operational details that people in his former position know. That kind of information has value." She looked at him. "It is your decision. I am offering an analysis." He was looking at her with the evaluating expression she had grown to know. "I will consider it," he said. "That is all I am asking," she said. He stood, which was the signal that the meeting had reached its end. She stood too, from habit, the way you stand when the tallest person in the room stands. She picked up her coat, which she had folded over the back of her chair during the meeting, and pulled it on. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I will need you in the war room again. Cole will have responses from the messages he sends today." "I will be there," she said. "Before breakfast," he said. "I am always up before breakfast," she said. He paused at the door. "I know," he said. "I have been told you are the first person in the kitchen most mornings." She had not known he knew that. "The cook does not seem to mind," she said. "The cook is delighted," he said. "You apparently asked her 3 questions about how the bread was made, and she has been telling everyone since." She did not have a response to this that seemed adequate. She held her coat and looked at him. "Go to sleep," he said, "in an actual bed or in the chair as you see fit, but go." She went. She walked the corridor to the room they had given her after the east room, still there, still temporary but less so each day, and she sat in the chair that was its permanent occupant now, her coat across her lap, the fire burning low. She thought about her mother reading the documents in the trade station. She thought about the 12-year-old Nell who had been 4 or 5 and sitting in a corner playing, and had seen a crate opened, and had seen a seal, and had not known what she was seeing and had carried the picture of it without knowing it for 9 years. She thought about everything her mother had understood and had been protecting and had eventually, running out of time, compressed into a cloth with a name and 8 words. "He is someone who stays." She looked at the fire. He had asked Tom where she should go and he had told them. He had asked her for the information and she had given it. He had placed a chair in a room for a child who could not yet sleep in beds. He had come to the stable yard in his outer jacket and given it to her without making anything of it. He had sat in a war room for 2 hours and taken the information she had been carrying seriously without once making her feel that the fact of her age made the information less serious. She thought about staying. She had chosen this. She had arrived here with research and a cloth and a plan. But choosing a thing in advance and finding it to be real when you arrive are not the same experience, and she had not fully understood until this week what real meant in this context. What it felt like to have your information treated as information. What it felt like to have a gap noticed and accommodated without commentary. What it felt like to be in a room where difficult things were being worked on and to be one of the people working on them. She had carried things alone for a long time. She put her hands flat on the arms of the chair and looked at the fire. She was still here. The siege came on the 7th day. They had expected it sooner. Aldrich had said 10 days as a working estimate, and Cole had used the 10 days as a framework for preparation, and the preparation had been thorough, guards rotated and reinforced. The wall joined where the three men had entered, repaired and watched, every approach to the stronghold monitored. They were ready for 10 days. They were also ready for 7. It was not a subtle siege. That was the first thing Nell noticed from the East Tower, where she was at that hour because Aldrich went there in the mornings and had, for the past week, not objected when she arrived. The group that appeared on the road below was too large to be anything other than what it was. 40 men, perhaps more, moving up the mountain road in a way that was organized but not military, not formation, not uniform, not the march of a trained force. These were people who knew how to move and had been given a direction, which was a different thing. "They are not soldiers," she said. Aldrich was beside her at the window. He was already in what she had come to think of as his working posture, squared, very still, his eyes moving across the road below in the steady way of someone who is seeing a situation clearly. "No," he said, "hired. Hired people are less reliable than trained ones." "Yes, but they are 40, and your garrison is smaller." Yes, he did not look troubled by this. "Cole has sent for support from the eastern posts. They will arrive by midday." She looked at the road. "The people on the road will be here before midday." "Yes," he said, "they will." She looked at him. "What happens between now and midday?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Stay away from the outer walls, the east corridor, and any room with a low window. Stay near the center of the keep. Stay with someone, Percy or Dora, not alone." She noted that he had not answered her question. She also noted that the answer he had given her was specific and practical and built on the assumption that she would do what he said without argument. She found, to her mild surprise, that she was not inclined to argue. "Understood," she said. "I will find you when it is over," he said. She looked at the road again. The figures were moving steadily. She looked at the gate below, at the guards on the wall, at the preparations she could see from here that had been made over the past 7 days. She looked at everything with the attention she gave to things she needed to understand completely. "There is something I have not told you," she said. He looked at her. "I mapped the defensive gaps 8 days ago," she said. "Before the night of the 3 men I had notes. I was going to give them to Cole and I did not because I was still in the habit of holding things back." She looked at the tower window. "I gave him the verbal version after that night, but I still have the written notes. They are more detailed." A pause. "Where are the notes?" he said. "My room," she said, "in the coat lining." He looked at her for 1 second, not with anger, with the particular expression of a person who is filing something to discuss later and is currently too busy to discuss it. "Go get them," he said. "Take them to Cole now." She went. She moved through the keep at pace, not running but moving the way she moved when efficiency was the priority. She retrieved the notes from the coat lining, 4 pages, small writing, her standard notation, numbered by corridor and location, and she took them to Cole, who was in the war room with 2 of the senior guards working through deployment. She put the notes on the table. Cole looked at them. He read the first page. He read the second. He looked at her. "Page 3, she said. "The south inner corridor. There is a point where the wall between it and the service passage is thin enough that a significant impact from the outside would create a gap. I did not see reinforcement there during the preparations." Cole turned to one of the guards. 3 words quietly, the guard left. He turned back to her. "What else?" She went through the rest of it. He listened and issued instructions as she did. It was a 5-minute conversation. At the end of it, he looked at her across the table. "These are good notes," he said. "I know," she said. "I should have given them sooner." "Yes," he said, "you should have." He looked at the door. "Go stay with Myra. She is in the household rooms, center of the keep." She went. The household rooms were a suite of rooms in the keep's interior that were used for domestic planning, and which had, she had noted, no direct external exposure. Myra was there, and 2 of the household staff, and Percy, who had been sent there by someone and who was sitting on a bench with the expression of someone who finds being kept away from events both sensible and deeply frustrating. She sat beside him. "He sent you here too," Percy said. "Cole did," she said. "I wanted to help," Percy said. She thought about this. "You are," she said. "You are where he needs you to be so that he knows where you are. That is a form of help." He looked at her. "That is not very exciting." "No," she said, "it is not, but it is useful." They sat. She sat through the sounds of the siege the way she sat through most things she could not control, with her hands flat on her thighs and her attention focused on what she could determine from the information available. She listened to the quality of the noise from outside, which changed as the morning progressed. She listened to the patterns of movement in the corridors beyond the household rooms. She listened to the difference between organized activity and frantic activity, and she categorized what she was hearing as the former. The stronghold did not feel panicked. It felt like a machine that had been prepared for a function and was now performing it. She thought about the preparation, the 7 days of it. Cole had taken her notes about the wall join and the service stairs and the gap in the guard rotation and built them into the defensive plan. He had taken the information about the south corridor and sent someone to address it immediately. He had used what she had given him. She thought about the notes she had given him this morning and felt the particular discomfort of understanding that those notes could have been in his hands a week ago. She did not waste time on the discomfort. She identified it, acknowledged it as information about a pattern she needed to change, and set it aside. The noise outside changed around midday. It changed in a specific way, a quality shift, a reduction in urgency, a different rhythm to the sounds of the wall. She looked at the ceiling as though she could see through it to the walls above, which she could not, but she listened, and what she was hearing was consistent with something concluding rather than something continuing. "It is quieting," Percy said. He had been listening too. "Yes," she said. They waited another half-hour. Then Cole appeared in the doorway of the household rooms, and his expression was the expression of a man who has been working hard for several hours, and the work has gone as it should. "Done," he said to the room generally. Myra stood, "Casualties." 4 men on the wall, Minor. The support from the eastern post arrived at the 2nd hour earlier than expected. He looked at Nell. "Your assessment of the approach route was accurate. They came the way your notes predicted." She held his gaze. "I am glad the notes were useful." He looked at her steadily for a moment. There was nothing reproachful in it. It was simply a look that said something had been noted. Then he moved on, as Cole always did, to the next thing. She found Aldrich 2 hours later, after the walls were confirmed clear and the keep had begun its return to normal operation in the East Tower. He was back at the window. He was looking at the road, which was empty again. The afternoon light was thin and flat on the mountain. She came and stood beside him. He looked at her. He did the quick inventory she had come to recognize, the check that she was intact. "I am fine," she said. "I know," he said. "Cole told me." She looked at the road. "The notes," she said. "I know, I should have given them earlier." "Yes," he said, "you should have." "I was still." "I know," he said. "You were still operating alone, I know." He turned from the window and looked at her directly. "Nell, look at me." She looked at him. "That is the last time," he said. "Not as a threat, as a fact. The next time you have information that relates to this keep or to your safety or to anything that affects the people here, you give it the same day you have it, not when you are ready, the same day." "Yes," she said. "Not because you are 9 and I am responsible for you," he said. "Because you are here, because you are part of this, because information that lives in one person's coat lining cannot protect anyone." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said again. "It was different the second time." He looked at her for a moment longer, then he looked at the road. "The Eastern Post arrived early because of the route I sent them," he said. "The route I sent them came from your notes. The South Corridor gap was reinforced because of your notes. The approach they used was predicted because of your notes." He was quiet for a moment. "If you had given those notes a week ago, the preparation would have been more complete. If you had not given them this morning, today would have gone differently." She understood what he was doing. He was giving her both sides of the same fact. He was not simply reprimanding. He was showing her the actual shape of the impact. "The notes mattered," she said. "Everything you know matters," he said. "You need to believe that, not abstractly, concretely. Every piece of information you hold matters to the people in this keep." She thought about the notes in the coat lining. She thought about what it had felt like to carry them, not the physical weight, but the other kind. The weight of knowing something and not being certain what to do with the knowing. "I will not do it again," she said. He nodded once. They stood at the window for a moment, both looking at the empty road, and then she said, "Cole used the word support." "The Eastern Post," he said. Yes, they arrived earlier than expected. One of my fastest riders met them on the road. You had already sent for them, she said, before this morning. 3 days ago, he said, precautionary. She looked at the road. You planned for the siege to come before the 10 days. I planned for multiple scenarios, he said. She looked at him sideways. Including this one. I thought it was likely, he said. She was quiet for a moment. She was doing the calculation she had failed to do before, running what she knew about him through the events of the past week, and arriving at the conclusion she should have arrived at 7 days ago, which was that the plan she had seen in the war room was not the whole plan, and the timing estimate he had given was a floor rather than a ceiling, and he had been running 2 versions of the preparation simultaneously. You did not tell me, she said. No, he said. Why? He looked at her. Because you were still learning that this is a safe place, he said, and I did not want you spending 7 days anticipating an attack on a specific timeline. That is not information that helps a 9-year-old sleep. She stood very still. She thought about the low chair in the east room. She thought about the jacket in the stable yard. She thought about a man who noticed things and responded to what was actually needed rather than what was expected. That was a decision made for my benefit, she said. Yes, without consulting me. Yes, he said. She thought about whether to argue this. She thought about the difference between being managed and being cared for, which was a distinction she had not previously had enough experience with the second thing to draw clearly. She thought about the notes in the coat lining. I suppose, she said, we are both still learning the right amount to tell each other. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said, we are. The afternoon light moved across the mountain. The road below was empty and the valley beyond it was very still. She stood at the window beside him and they looked at it together, and the keep breathed around them, and the day moved toward evening. The response from the Territorial Bureau came on the 9th day. Cole brought it to the war room in the morning, and the 3 of them, Aldrich, Cole, and Nell, sat at the table and read it. The intermediary had been careful, the inquiry worded obliquely, the request framed as a general administrative inquiry rather than a specific case pull. The Bureau had responded with the information for the case number, as expected, because the case was old enough and low enough in the filing hierarchy that it did not trigger any review. The file existed. The case number matched the notation on her mother's paper. The date corresponded exactly to the date Vera Lorne had written. The location was the trade station near the Northern Junction, the one decommissioned 3 months later. The case had been opened under the title of an administrative transfer review, which was the official language for the kind of transfer that her mother had witnessed the documents discussing. The case had been marked closed without action 18 months after it was opened. No record of the original documents, no record of the parties involved. Simply opened, reviewed, no further action required. Which meant that someone had closed it deliberately. Someone with access to the Bureau filing system who understood that a case closed without action left no record of what had originally triggered the case. Except for a case number, written on a small piece of paper by a frightened record keeper who understood enough about how official systems worked to understand that case numbers were the threads that held things together, and that if you could find the right thread and pull it, the rest would follow. Cole put the papers down. He looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at Nell. She was reading the Bureau response for the second time. She put it down. The closure authorization, she said. Who signed it? Cole found the page. He pointed to the name. She looked at it. She looked at Aldrich. Is this person still in a position of authority? She said. Yes, Aldrich said, a different position, higher. She was quiet for a moment. Then you have enough, she said. You have the case number, the original date and location, my mother's written notation, the testimony from Tom about the network, my testimony about the seal, and now a name attached to the deliberate closure of a case that should have led to an investigation. She looked at the papers on the table. That is a chain. It is enough to open a formal inquiry, Cole said, through the appropriate territorial authority. Which would not be the Bureau, given what we now know about the Bureau. The King's Council has authority to initiate a territorial inquiry outside the Bureau, Nell said. She had read the territorial history closely. If the inquiry is initiated at this level, It goes directly to the governing body rather than through the administrative structures. Both men looked at her. I read extensively, she said. The council convenes in 3 days, Aldrich said. I will present it then. He looked at the papers. Nell, you will need to present your testimony formally, not in this room to me and Cole, formally, in front of the council and the inquiry panel. She had known this was coming. I understand, she said. You do not have to, he said carefully, formally. There are other ways to enter testimony, written. I want to do it in person, she said. Verbal testimony from a witness carries more weight than a written statement. I have read enough case records to know that. She looked at him. And it was my mother's account. I want to be the one who delivers it. He held her gaze. All right, he said. She had 3 days. She used them well. She went through the territorial history again, specifically the sections on formal inquiry procedure. She asked Cole 3 specific questions about how council presentations worked and how witnesses were examined. She asked Myra if there were clothes more appropriate to a formal setting than what she currently had, and Myra arranged it without drama, returning with a set of clothes that were simple and well-made and fit her correctly, which she had learned was not a thing she should take for granted. On the second evening, Percy found her in the library. He was carrying something. He came in and stood across the table from her and held it out. It was a small book, thin, bound in something soft. What is this? She said. It is a record of the first formal inquiry held in this territory, he said. 60 years ago, I found it in the archive room. He paused. I thought it might be useful to read an example. She took it from him, she looked at it, she looked at him. Thank you, Percy, she said. He nodded with the dignity of someone who has done something they are pleased about but is managing this with restraint. He turned to go. Percy, she said. He turned back. You are a good person to have around, she said. He looked at her for a moment. His round face did something brief and involuntary, then he regained control of it. I know, he said, and left. She smiled at the table, small and private. She read the record of the 60-year-old inquiry that evening. It was useful. The procedures had not changed significantly. She noted what the presiding member had asked and what the witnesses had been required to address and how the evidence had been presented. She made notes. On the morning of the 3rd day, she went to the East Tower. Aldrich was there as he was most mornings. He turned when she came in. She stood beside him at the window. The valley below was dusted with early frost. The road was empty, and the light was the pale, clear light of a cold morning before the clouds came in. I am ready, she said. I know, he said. She looked at the road. I have been thinking about what I am going to say. Tell me, he said. She told him. She walked him through the sequence she had constructed, the date, the station, what her mother saw, the documents, the seal, the case number, the notation, the testimony she carried not as abstract knowledge, but as something she had been entrusted with and had carried for 2 years across hundreds of miles, and had brought to this place for this purpose. She told him not the way she had told him in the war room, piecemeal, adding things as they became relevant, but as a complete and ordered account, the way a witness speaks when they understand that the telling is itself a serious act. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, the valley was lighter, and the morning clouds had not yet arrived. That is good, he said. That is very good. It needs to be, she said. My mother deserves the best version of it. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, she does. They stood at the window for a while. She was right about you, Nell said. It was not something she had planned to say. It came out the way things come out when they have been true for long enough that they stop needing to be kept. He looked at her. The 8 words, she said. She was right, I know that now, not just from evidence. She paused from knowing. He held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved through his face. Not drama, something quieter than that. The kind of thing that moves through people when they hear a sentence that reaches past what they expected to feel. He looked back at the valley. She looked at the valley too. The road below was empty, and the frost on the valley floor caught the morning light. And beside her the king stood very still in the way he stood when something had arrived in him that he was choosing to hold carefully. And she did not say anything else because there was nothing else to say. And they stood there together in the pale, clear morning until the clouds came in and the light changed, and it was time to go down. The council chamber was full. Not just the 7 council members. Representatives from the eastern and northern posts, 2 members of the territorial administration, and a formal inquiry panel of 3 who had come from outside the territory at Aldrich's request to ensure the process was not self-serving. Cole had arranged the room and the seating and the order of proceedings with his usual economy. Nell sat to Aldrich's left at the head of the table. She put her hands flat on the table's surface. She looked at the room. Ferris at the far end looked back. 3 weeks, she had said. It had been exactly 3 weeks since the council meeting where he had called her child with an edge to it. He looked at her now without the edge. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the corridor afterward, with the recalibrated attention of someone who has revised his estimate. She looked at him, she nodded once. He nodded back. Aldrich opened the proceedings and presented the initial framework, the 3 men at the wall, the investigation that followed, the evidence that had come together over the weeks since. He spoke for 12 minutes. Then he sat. Then Nell stood. She spoke for 22 minutes. She described everything in order clearly, using the precise language of someone who has been reading territorial law for 3 days, and who was raised by a woman who understood how official systems worked and passed that understanding on in the long, careful conversations of the last year of her life. She did not elaborate where she did not need to. She did not understate where it mattered. She told it the way she had rehearsed it in the East Tower that morning, and she told it to the room rather than to any one person in it, because it belonged to the room. When she finished, there was a silence. One of the inquiry panel members asked her 2 clarifying questions. She answered them. Another asked about the notation, the paper with the case number. Cole produced it. The panel member examined it. Then the room was quiet again. The formal vote to open the inquiry took 11 minutes. It was unanimous. The inquiry took 6 weeks. Nell was not at the center of those 6 weeks. She had delivered her testimony and submitted the notation and answered the panel's questions. And after that the work became the work of people who were trained to do it, investigators who went to the trade station site, which was still physically there even if it had been officially decommissioned, and found the foundations and matched them to Vera Lorne's description. Archivists who pulled the bureau records and found the discrepancy between the case file and the administrative record. Territorial officials who followed the chain from the case closure authorization to the person who had signed it, and from there to the network that Tom and others confirmed, and from there further still, through a series of careful and documented steps, to the thing that her mother had witnessed 11 years ago and had understood was wrong, and had carried the knowledge of alone until there was no more time. Nell followed it through reports, not presence. Cole gave her the reports. Not because she demanded them, she did not demand things from Cole, but because Aldrich had told him to, which she learned from Percy, who appeared to monitor the flow of instructions through the keep the way a careful engineer monitors a river. She read the reports in the evenings in the low chair by the window of the room that was no longer temporary in any meaningful sense, even if it had not been formally designated otherwise. She had moved back to the east room after the night of the 3 men, back to the garden window and the old walls and the thick stone that was thick for a reason. She read the reports and she annotated them in her small, careful handwriting, and she asked Cole questions when the reports raised them. And the questions, she noticed, became progressively more specific as the weeks went on, which Cole seemed to receive as expected rather than remarkable. In the 6th week, the panel issued its preliminary finding. The network existed. The documents existed, in various forms and in various places, enough of them surviving or recoverable to constitute a record. The transfer scheme was documented, a plan now partly enacted to manipulate the formal processes by which territorial authority was assigned, in ways that would benefit the people who had designed the plan. The person who had closed the bureau case had done so on behalf of this network. There were others connected through the same structure, all identified, all now subject to formal proceedings that would take considerably more time but were, Cole explained, inevitable. None of this could have happened without a date, a location, a case number, and a description of a seal. He said this to her without emphasis, as a fact. She received it as a fact. What she thought about in the evenings was her mother. She thought about the long years of Vera Lorne in the eastern settlements, far from the trade roads, building a life small enough that it would not attract attention, raising a child without explaining why they moved carefully and why certain questions were not answered, and why they did not have the kind of connections most people had. She thought about the choices her mother had made and the weight of what she had been carrying, and the fact that she had carried it for 11 years while also being, as far as Nell could remember, and she had checked every memory she had against this question, a gentle person. A person who told stories and taught her daughter to read, and described a man on a cloth with 8 words that turned out to be exactly right. The weight of what her mother had carried had not made her hard. Nell thought about this at length. She thought about whether the same would be true of herself, whether the things she had carried and was still carrying in different forms would soften or harden over time. She did not know the answer, but she thought that having a place to carry them in mattered. She thought that things carried alone hardened differently than things carried with someone. She was still thinking about this when Aldrich found her on the wall. She had taken to walking the outer wall in the late afternoons when the weather was not too severe, which Cole had officially cleared, and which the guards on the wall rotation had informally accepted with the specific equanimity of people who have been told to watch over something, and have decided the most dignified way to do this is to do it without making the thing they are watching feel watched. She walked the wall and looked at the valley and thought, which was the activity she was best at and which the wall was good for. He came up the north stairs and joined her. She did not look around immediately. She heard his footsteps, she knew his footsteps, and she continued looking at the valley, and he came to stand beside her. "The panel's finding came through," he said. "Cole told me," she said. "All of it." "The summary," she said. "I will read the full report tomorrow." He was quiet for a moment. The valley below was in shadow, the sun having moved behind the western ridge. The sky above it was the particular blue of late afternoon before it starts to lose its color. "It is over," he said, "the immediate part." "The immediate part," she agreed. "The rest will take time." "Yes," he looked at the valley. "Your mother's account will be entered formally into the inquiry record. Her name will appear as the originating witness." She had not expected this. She held still. "The panel wanted the record to be accurate," he said. "The case originated with her, it should say so." She looked at the valley, she breathed carefully. "Thank you," she said. It was insufficient, but it was what she had. "It is correct," he said, "not a gift, correct." She understood the distinction. They stood on the wall as the light continued to change. The guards on the far section of the wall were distant enough to be shapes rather than people. She had been thinking for the past several days about something she wanted to ask him. She had been waiting, in her usual way, for the right moment. She had identified this moment as the one before she reached the wall this afternoon, which was why she had come to the wall. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask," he said. She looked at the valley. "When my mother wrote the 8 words, when she told me to find you," she paused, "did you know about me before I arrived?" He was quiet. "I did not know she had a child," he said. "I did not know she had stayed in the settlements. I did not know any of it." A pause. "When I read the 8 words, I knew what they meant, that she had trusted me with something that mattered. I did not know the shape of it until I saw you standing in the yard." "But you recognized it," she said, "when you saw me." "I recognized that I was being given something important," he said, "the understanding of what came later." She looked at the valley. "She said you were someone who stayed," she said. "She wrote it at the end of her life for a child she was leaving to give that child a direction." She was quiet for a moment. "I think she wrote it not just as information about you. I think she wrote it as a promise she was making on your behalf." He did not speak immediately. "She could not know for certain," Nell said. "She had not seen you in over a decade. People change. She was taking a risk." "Yes," he said, "she was." "She took the risk," Nell said. A silence. "She was right too," he said. She looked at him then, turning from the valley. He was looking at the valley still, his profile still and careful. She had learned his face over weeks, the particular stillness of it when something had moved him, the small differences between controlled and composed, the way his jaw shifted when he was holding something in that had decided it would like to come out. He turned and looked at her. She looked back. "I want to ask you something else," she said. "I have been waiting to ask it because I wanted to be sure I was asking when I knew the answer already, when I was asking for confirmation rather than information." He waited. "Do you think of me as your daughter?" she said. "Not in the formal sense, not in the sense of what the council voted or what the documents say, in the actual sense." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. She held that. "Since when?" she said. He thought about this, since the yard, he said, when you took my hand. She remembered it, the way she had reached up and taken his hand without really planning to, the way it had just been the thing that made sense in the moment. She had thought about it afterward, whether it had been the right choice, whether it had been too forward. She had decided it had been correct. You froze, she said. Something moved across his face. Yes, he said, I did. I noticed, she said. I know, he said. He was quiet for a moment. I froze because it had been a very long time since someone had reached for my hand because they wanted to, not because of protocol or ceremony or what the situation required. He paused. Just because they wanted to. She looked at the valley. She thought about what it meant to reach for someone because you wanted to, not because the situation required it. She thought about the difference between that and the calculated decision she had made weeks ago, standing in the gate with her cloth and her research, choosing a person because the evidence supported the choice. The evidence had been right. But this was different from the evidence. The evidence was a starting point. This was where they had arrived. I'm going to ask you one more thing, she said. Ask, he said. She looked at him. When do you think I will sleep in the bed? He stared at her. She held it for 2 seconds. Then the corner of her mouth moved and she let it, and he looked at her and something in his face did the thing it did rarely and involuntarily, a crack in the careful composure, something warm and genuine and slightly surprised. He laughed. Not loud, not theatrical. The quiet laugh of someone who has been caught off guard in the best possible way. It lasted only a moment, and then it settled, but it had been there, and she had seen it, and she filed it in the part of her mind where she kept things that were real and confirmed. When you are ready, he said, his voice still had the residue of it. That is the right answer, she said. I know, he said, you taught me. She turned back to the valley. He turned back too. The blue of the sky was softening toward the color it became before evening, and the valley below was deep in shadow but not dark yet, still the particular color of things that are between one state and another. I have been thinking, she said, about something Ferris said. Which thing? He told me I argue like someone who was trained by people who did not tolerate imprecision, she said. I told him I taught myself. He said yes, he thought I probably did. He was right, Aldrich said. He was, she agreed, but I have been thinking that is no longer quite accurate. I have been learning things here that I did not know before, from Myra and Cole and you, different things than I knew how to learn before, because before I was learning everything alone and now I am learning with people who know things I do not. She paused. I would like to note that I find this better. He was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. She stood on the wall beside him until the valley went dark and the stars came out, and the guards on the far section called the shift change in the particular way they called it on cold nights, louder than strictly necessary, enough warmth in the sound to carry. She stood there as long as it was comfortable and then a little longer, and then she said good evening and went down. She went back to the east room. The garden below the window was dark and still. The fire was going and the low chair was where it always was, at the angle she had adjusted it to for the garden view. The bed was against the far wall with the autumn leaf cover on it, slightly different from when she had first arrived, because Dora had replaced the cover with one that was softer. This had been done quietly, without comment, approximately 2 weeks ago. She looked at the chair, she looked at the bed. She walked to the bed. She climbed into it, it was still very high, still requiring effort, and she pulled the cover up. She lay on her back, she looked at the ceiling. The firelight moved on it. She lay there. She did not move to the floor. She did not move at all except her breathing, which was even, and her eyes, which were open for a while and then were not. She slept in the bed. She woke in the bed. This was new in a way she had not fully anticipated, not the fact of it, which she had known intellectually was coming, but the experience of it. The experience of waking up in the place where you went to sleep, in the bed you had been told was yours, in the room you had been given, in the keep that had become, over the course of weeks, a place your body had decided was different from other places. She lay still for a moment looking at the ceiling. The fire had gone out. The room was cold the way east rooms are cold in the early morning, the warmth having had all night to disperse, and the garden window was full of the gray light of just before sunrise. She could hear the first birds, the ones that started before the light was fully established. She had slept in the bed. She noted this as a fact and filed it in the part of her mind where she kept evidence, and the evidence said, "Something has changed." She got up. She built the fire herself, which she had learned to do in the first week, and which Dora had gradually stopped doing for her as it became clear that Nell preferred to do it herself. She made the fire small and efficient and sat in the low chair with her hands wrapped around her own arms until the room warmed enough to be comfortable. Then she went to the East Tower. Aldrich was there. He turned when she came in. He looked at her. He looked at her in the way he looked at things he was noticing, a brief assessment, something registered, filed. "You slept," he said. Not in the chair, he knew the difference. She could see it. "In the bed," she said. He turned back to the window. "Good," he said. She came to stand beside him. The valley was in the very first light, the frost on the lower ground catching the pale color of a sky that had not yet decided to be fully blue. The road was empty, as it was most mornings. She had something to tell him. She had known since yesterday afternoon on the wall that she would tell him today, and she had slept on it, and sleeping on things was how she confirmed them. "I have been thinking about something," she said. "Tell me," he said. "My mother's name was Vera Lorne," she said. Lorne was the name of the settlement she came from. It was her origin name, not a family name. The settlements used place names for people who did not have family ones. She paused. "I have been using Nell since I was 7, just Nell without the second part, because Lorne felt like a place I had left and not a thing I was carrying with me." She was quiet for a moment. "I understand now that I was carrying it the whole time. She was the origin I was carrying, even when I did not know it." He was looking at the valley, he was listening. "I want to keep carrying it," she said. "Her name, but I also want the name that means I am here, that I stayed." She looked at the valley, "If that is something that is possible." He was very still for a moment. "Nell Lorne," she said slowly, "is where I came from." "Nell," she paused. "I do not yet know the form you use here, whether it is the king's name or the territory's name or—" "We use the family name," he said. His voice was very level. "In this territory, in formal records, a child under the protection of the head of the family takes the family name by the head's acknowledgement." He paused. "It would be mine." She looked at the valley. "Is that what you would like?" he said. "Or do you want time?" She thought about it. She thought about it with the thoroughness she gave to things that mattered, which was thorough, and she arrived at the same place she had arrived at before she came to the tower this morning. "I do not need time," she said. "I have been deciding this since the yard." He said nothing for a moment. "Then it will be arranged," he said. "There is a formal acknowledgement that the council witnesses. It is a simple ceremony, not long." A pause. "Cole will need to draft the record. Myra will need to arrange the room. It can be done within the week." "Within the week," she said. "Does that work?" "Yes," she said. They stood at the window. She thought about her mother writing 8 words on a cloth. She thought about what it meant to name a direction for your child and trust that the direction was right. She thought about the cost of that trust, the cost of not being able to see where the direction led, of sending a small person into the world with a piece of cloth and hoping it was enough. She thought about how it was enough and how Vera Lorne had been right, and how she wished for a moment that she had some way of confirming that her mother knew. She thought that she probably did not need a way. Her mother had written the words because she believed them. She had believed them because she knew him, and she had known him well enough to compress everything she knew into 8 words and trust that they would hold. They had held. She would have liked to see this, Nell said. He did not say anything for a moment. Yes, he said, she would have. The valley brightened below them as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, and the frost began to lose its blue color and become white, and then to vanish slowly as the thin warmth of the morning arrived. They watched it happen. Percy told me, she said, that you came to the war room after I testified. He said you stood outside for a while. He looked at the valley. Percy monitors things, he said. He does, she agreed. Why did you stand outside? A silence not long. Because you were in there without me, he said. And because you needed to be, he paused. And because standing outside was what I could do that was not either going in or going away. She understood this. She understood it in the specific way of someone who has learned, recently and imperfectly, that being close without interfering is its own kind of presence. Thank you, she said, for staying outside. You did not need me in there, he said. I know, she said, but I knew you were there. She paused. It was useful knowing you were there. He looked at her. There was something in his expression that she recognized as the cousin of what had happened when she told him her mother had been right about him. Not the same, but the same family. He looked back at the valley. We should go down, he said. There is work today. There is always work, she said. Yes, he said, there is. She fell into step beside him on the tower stairs. He was taller than her by a significant amount, and the stairs were narrow, so he went ahead by half a step and she followed, and at the bottom of the stairs the corridor opened and they walked side by side in the wider space, toward the smell of the kitchens and the sound of the keep beginning its day. Percy was already in the corridor. He had clearly been doing something there that was not waiting, but the way he looked up when they appeared was the way he looked up when he had been waiting and was pleased that the waiting had concluded. Morning, he said. Percy, Aldrich said. Percy looked at Nell with the particular look that meant he had news. The brown horse, he said to her. Emery says she is accepting the saddle this morning. He thought you would want to know. Nell thought about the horse. She thought about the 8 mornings of standing still, and the apple and the neck, and the careful, accumulating patience of it. I will go after breakfast, she said. Percy nodded with professional satisfaction. She kept walking. Behind her she could feel Aldrich's attention, not on Percy or the corridor or the day ahead but on her for a moment. She did not turn. She kept walking toward the kitchen and the food and the morning. She was here. She had come 3 weeks on foot from the eastern settlements with a cloth and 6 pieces of paper, and the inventory of a 9-year-old who had been managing alone since she was 7. And she had stood at a gate and said a name and walked through the door and across the yard and through the inner doors and into a war room, and laid out everything she had on a table. She had been right about the evidence. She had been right about the man. She had been right about the place. She had been right that the world was not always kind to people who did not have someone to stand with them. She had someone to stand with her. She walked down the corridor of the stronghold that was 200 years old and had walls that were twice the thickness of the newer parts, and went to eat breakfast in the kitchen, where the cook had started saving her the particular bread she had asked about 3 weeks ago, the dark kind with the seeds in it, and set it aside every morning without being asked. That was also staying. It did not only come in large forms. She sat at the kitchen table and ate her breakfast, and the cook told her something about the bread, and she asked 2 questions, and Percy came and sat across from her and told her something he had heard, and she listened, and the morning continued around her, ordinary and warm and hers. The acknowledgement was on a Thursday. This was not planned. Thursday had no particular significance in the calendar of the stronghold. It was not a ceremonial day or a market day or any day that carried formal weight. Cole had drafted the record on Tuesday, Myra had arranged the room on Wednesday, and the gathering had been set for Thursday simply because Thursday was when the thing was ready. There were 15 people in the council chamber. Nell counted them when she came in, which was a habit she had not yet stopped doing and was not certain she wanted to. The 7 council members, including Ferris, who had arrived first and was sitting in his usual chair with the particular posture of someone who has decided that being early is a form of opinion. Cole, standing to the side with the formal record already open on the table in front of him. Myra, Percy, who had been given official permission to be there on the basis of a direct request from Nell, which she had made to Aldrich on Wednesday, and which he had agreed to without comment. The 3 members of the inquiry panel, who were still in the territory and who had asked to attend when they heard. 3 members of the senior household staff, who had been invited by Myra. Aldrich was already at the head of the table when she walked in. He was standing, which meant everyone else was standing, which was how these things worked, and he watched her come in with the same attention he always gave to things he was observing. She was wearing the clothes Myra had arranged. They were well made and simple, and the color of the walls in the early morning, a gray that was almost blue. She had done her hair herself, which had been a project of moderate ambition, and she was carrying the cloth in her left hand, held loosely, the way she carried it when she did not need to hold it tightly anymore because what it pointed to was no longer in the future. She walked to the place beside Aldrich. She stood there and she looked at the room. Cole began the formal record. He read the relevant section of territorial law, the acknowledgement by the head of a family of a child under protection, the formal transfer of the family name, the entering of the fact into the permanent territorial record. It was not long. Cole had said it was not long, and he had been accurate. When Cole finished the reading, he looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked at Nell. She looked at him. This was the part that was not scripted. The formal procedure specified that the acknowledgement be made orally, in the presence of witnesses, and that the record be signed. It did not specify what the acknowledgement was required to say. He had not told her what he was going to say. She had not asked. She had decided, when she thought about it on Wednesday, that this was a moment that should not be prepared against, that whatever he said should come from the actual rather than the rehearsed. He said, "I acknowledge Nell as my daughter, in the record, in this room, and without condition or end." He paused for a moment. "She arrived at my gate with more certainty than I had about anything, and more courage than I had forgotten people could carry, and she told me I was coming with her because she needed a father. I did not know at the time what that meant. I know now. It meant she was already what she would always be, someone who decides what is true and then lives inside it. I am the beneficiary of that decision. The record can say whatever it says. The fact is this: she is my daughter." The room was quiet. She had known she would hold herself still, and she did. She held herself still, and she looked at him, and she held the cloth with her left hand, and she let everything he had said come in the way it came in, not dramatically, not with the kind of feeling that shakes a person, but with the kind that settles, the kind that adds a stone to a foundation. She said, "I came here because of evidence. I stayed because of knowing the evidence was accurate." She paused. "My mother sent me in the right direction. I intend to honor that by being here and by being useful and by asking too many questions and by continuing to note the defensive gaps in the perimeter before someone else does." She heard something from the direction of Cole's position that was not quite a sound but was adjacent to one. "And by being his daughter. Not because the record says so, because he earned it." Someone in the room did something brief and involuntary. She did not see who. Cole signed the record. He passed it to Aldrich, who signed it. Then he set it on the table and looked at the room. "Witnessed," he said, which was the word the procedure required. "Witnessed," said the room, which was the response the procedure required. And that was the formal part. After the room became what rooms become when the official thing has concluded, and the people in them revert to being people. There was movement and conversation, and Myra began directing something that would become food from somewhere, and Percy appeared at Nell's side with an expression of someone who has been present for a significant event, and is processing it through the available channels. "That was good," he said. "Yes," she said. Ferris looked like he was going to. Percy stopped. "I know," she said. "He held it." "Just barely," Percy said. She looked across the room at Ferris, who was talking to Cole with the very deliberate attention of someone who is not looking somewhere else. He had the posture of a person who has experienced something that has moved him, and is managing this with as much dignity as available. She walked over to him. He saw her coming and finished the sentence he was on and looked at her. "Nell," he said. The word was different in his mouth than it had been 8 weeks ago in the council chamber. She heard the difference. "Ferris," she said. He looked at her. He was a tall man and she was still 9, and the difference in height required him to look down and required her to look up, but neither of them seemed to notice this. "Your testimony," he said. "In the inquiry I have reviewed the full panel transcript." He paused. "Your mother raised someone exceptional. She held this. She did her best with very little," Nell said. "I think the exceptional part is hers more than mine." Ferris looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was the thing she had seen occasionally in the faces of people who have looked at a thing for a long time and have finally seen it correctly. "Yes," he said, "I think you may be right." He nodded with the gravity of a man who does not nod lightly, and moved away. She stood in the middle of the room for a moment. Then she felt Aldrich beside her, not behind her but beside, which was where he was when he was not making a point of being anywhere specific. She did not look at him. She looked at the room. "Ferris," she said quietly. "I saw," he said. "4 weeks, not 3, she said. "You said 3, he said. "I was wrong about 1 week, she said. "I will adjust my estimation model." She heard the thing again that had happened on the wall, contained, brief, real. "Come," he said. "Myra has arranged something in the hall. You should eat." She went with him. The great hall was different from the council chamber. It was the room where the full population of the keep gathered for the evening meal, the long tables and the fire at both ends, and the particular sound of many people in an enclosed space. A sound that was neither quiet nor loud but was full, in the way that things are full when there is enough of the right thing in them. When they came in, the hall was already filled with the household, the guards who were not on rotation, the kitchen staff, the stablemen, the administrative people, everyone who lived and worked inside the walls. They had heard, through the particular speed at which things traveled in the keep, what had happened in the council chamber. Emery was there. He looked at Nell and gave her a nod that meant something specific in the language of a man who worked with horses and communicated accordingly. She nodded back. Rolf, the night stable hand, was there. He saw her and looked startled, as he always did, and then composed himself with the effort it always required. She sat in the seat Myra had indicated, which was not the far end of the table or the middle of it but a specific seat, near enough to the head to be significant, with space on either side that would be occupied by people she knew. Percy sat down beside her, with the plate he had been carrying since he decided he was going to sit here. Dora, who had been rebuilding the fire in the east room since the second morning, sat down across. She looked at Nell and smiled in the quiet way of someone who does not make large things of things but is nonetheless glad about them. The hall filled, the meal began. She ate and she listened, and she spoke when she was spoken to, and she asked 3 questions and answered several more, and the hall was warm and loud in the good way, and somewhere to her right Aldrich was talking to Cole about something administrative, and somewhere to her left Percy was telling her something about the brown horse that she was only half listening to because she was doing something she had not done in a long time. She was simply being where she was. Not tracking the exits, not cataloging the people, not assessing the perimeter or evaluating the risks or planning the next 3 possible directions. Just sitting in the great hall of the stronghold that was 200 years old, in the seat that had been arranged for her, with the cloth in her pocket against her chest. After the meal she went back to the east room. The fire was already going. The low chair was at its angle. The bed was against the far wall. She crossed the room. She took the cloth out of her pocket. She sat on the edge of the bed. She was getting better at the getting in, though it still required effort, and she looked at the cloth. She looked at the name on it, which she did not need to read because she knew it, and she looked at the 8 words below, which she also did not need to read. She sat with the cloth for a moment. Then she folded it very carefully, the way you fold something that has finished the work it was made for and can now rest. She folded it in the same creases it had always had, the creases of many foldings, worn soft and permanent. She stood up and went to the small shelf above the basin, where there were 3 books and the lamp. She moved one of the books and placed the cloth behind it, so it was not on display but not put away either, somewhere between the 2. She went back to the bed and climbed in. The cover was the soft one Dora had put there. The fire was the one she had built herself in the morning. The garden below the window was dark. She lay on her back. She thought about her mother. She thought about a woman who had been careful and frightened and gentle all at once, who had spent 11 years watching and waiting and keeping a child alive, and trying to ensure that when the time came, the child would have what she needed to go in the right direction. She thought about the effort of that, the weight of it and the grace of it. She thought about what she wanted to say to her, and she thought that she did not have words that were sufficient, and that this was all right, because the thing she would want to say most was something that could only be said by being here, and she was here, and that was the saying of it. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the morning, about the formal record and the hall and the meal and the seat that had been arranged. She thought about Aldrich's words in the council chamber, which she had already placed in the part of her mind where she kept things that were real and confirmed, alongside the chair and the jacket and the East Tower and the 8 words, and the moment in the yard when she had reached up and taken his hand. She thought about the name. She had not said it aloud yet. It was in the record, but she had not heard herself say it. She said it now quietly in the room. Nell. It was a name that meant she had come from somewhere, and it was a name that meant she had arrived somewhere, and it was a name that would be in the territorial record, and in the formal acknowledgement, and in the daily life of the stronghold, for as long as daily life in the stronghold continued. It was her name. She turned onto her side. The garden window showed the dark sky and the faint suggestion of stars through the heavy clouds that had come in with the evening. The fire was low and warm. She closed her eyes. She slept in the bed in the east room in the stronghold on the mountain, in the territory where the road ran down to the valley and up to the gate, and through the iron doors into a front yard where some weeks ago a small girl had stood in the center of everything and said, "You're coming with me, I need a father." The king had frozen. And then he had followed. And the cloth was on the shelf, and the name was in the record, and she was here, and she was sleeping. And outside the walls the mountain was very quiet, and the road was empty, and the night passed the way nights pass when the thing that was needed has arrived and the waiting is done. She woke before the house. This was not unusual. She woke before most things, before the birds and before the kitchen and before the first guard rotation change, in the particular dark of early morning that was not the dark of the middle of the night, but the dark just before the gray crept in. She lay still for a moment, orienting, and the first thing she knew was that she was in the bed, and the second thing was that it was Thursday. It was still Thursday. The acknowledgement had been in the afternoon, and the meal had been in the evening, and she had gone to sleep in the bed on the night of Thursday, and now she was waking up on the morning that was still technically Thursday, in the very early hours before Friday took over. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. She thought about the name in the record. She thought about the formal words and the room full of people and Ferris who had held himself together by 1 week less than she had estimated. She thought about Percy next to her at the table, and Dora across from her, and Emery's nod and Rolf's permanent startled expression. She thought about Cole signing the record with the efficiency of someone who has prepared for this moment, in all its legal and administrative dimensions, and finds the completion of it satisfying in the way that properly completed things are satisfying. She thought about Aldrich saying, "She is my daughter." Not "I acknowledge the child," not by the authority of the formal procedure, not the language of the record which was correct and necessary and its own kind of statement, but the actual words which were simpler than all of those, "She is my daughter." She had kept herself still, and she had spoken her own words and she had been satisfied with them, and then the formal part had concluded, and the room had become people again, and the whole thing had settled in her like something settling in good ground. She was 9 years old. She was 9 years old and she had been alone for 2 years and she had walked 3 weeks and she had stood at a gate and said a name and been let in. And now she had a name in a record and a room with a garden window and a low chair and a bed that she was sleeping in. And the name on the cloth was no longer a direction to somewhere she had not yet arrived. She turned her head and looked at the shelf where the cloth was. She could not see it from the bed in the dark, but she knew it was there. She thought about whether there was anything she had not done that she had intended to do. She went through the list the way she went through everything methodically, starting from the beginning. She had found him, she had given him her research, she had told him about her mother, she had given Cole the notes and the notation. She had delivered the testimony, she had given him everything she had been carrying. She had not given him the 8 words. Not the full 8 words. He had read them on the cloth in the yard on the first morning, she knew this. But she had not spoken them to him directly, had not said, "These are the words she chose, and this is what they meant to me, and this is what I found when I came here." She had told him his mother was right about him, but she had not said the 8 words. She thought about whether this needed to be said. She decided that it did, not because the situation required it, not because the record required it, not because anything formal required it, because she wanted to, because she was no longer exclusively the person who kept things until they were needed. She was also now the person who said things because they were true and she wanted the person to know them. She would tell him in the morning, in the East Tower where they went in the mornings, she would tell him then. She fell back to sleep. When she woke the second time it was properly morning, grey light through the garden window, the beginnings of the bird sound that started early in the old walls where they nested. She got up and built the fire and dressed and went to the kitchen. The cook had the bread ready. She set it down with the particular air of someone who has performed this action enough times for it to have become a ritual. And she said good morning and Nell said good morning, and Nell asked her something about the fire temperature for the second rise of bread dough, which had been on her mind since the previous week, and the cook answered with genuine enthusiasm for the next several minutes. Nell listened and asked 2 follow-up questions and thanked her and took the bread and went. The East Tower was empty when she arrived. She stood at the window and looked at the valley. The morning was clear, no clouds yet, and the frost on the valley floor was brilliant in the early light, and the road wound down from the gate to the valley floor and then straightened into the east, and she stood there and looked at it and thought about the person who had walked up that road. She heard the footsteps on the stairs. She did not turn. He came in and she heard him register that she was already there, a slight pause in his movement, the fraction of a second that meant he had seen her and was noting it. Then he came to stand beside her at the window. "You are here early," he said. "I woke up in the night," she said. "I was thinking." He looked at the valley. "About what?" She held the bread she had brought from the kitchen. She had intended to eat it at some point. She was not eating it now because she was doing the thing she had decided to do, which was saying the thing she wanted to say. "I want to tell you the 8 words," she said. He turned and looked at her. "You read them," she said, "the first morning in the yard, but I want to say them to you directly, because I want you to hear them from me, not from a cloth." He was very still. She looked at him. She said them. "He is someone who stays." The east tower was very quiet. The valley below was brilliant with frost and the road was empty, and the light was coming over the ridge in the particular way it came at this hour, flat and clear and honest. He looked at her. She looked at him. "She wrote them for me," Nell said, "so I would have a direction, but I think she also wrote them because they were true and she wanted them to be said even if she could not say them herself. She was running out of time and she wrote the truest thing she knew about you and she trusted me to carry it." She paused. "I have carried it, and now I am saying it directly from me to you." He held her gaze for a long time. Then he reached out. He took her left hand, the one that was not holding the bread, and he held it in both of his the way you hold something you intend to keep. He held it for a moment and she let him, and neither of them said anything, and the morning continued around them, growing lighter, the frost in the valley beginning its slow retreat as the sun climbed. Then he let go and she put the bread on the window ledge between them, and she broke a piece off and handed half to him, and he took it, and they stood at the east tower window and ate bread in the early morning and looked at the road and said nothing for a long time. "Ferris," he said eventually. "4 weeks," she said. "He will say 3, he said. "Let him," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You were going to say 3. "I revised my estimate based on new information," she said. He made the sound. She let herself smile, small and real, looking at the road below. This was also a thing she was learning, to let what she felt show when she was with him. Not all of it all the time, but some of it here in the mornings, in the East Tower where he came before the day started, and she now came too, because it was the right place for the part of the day before everything else began. They stood there until the sun was fully up, and the frost was gone, and the valley was plain morning light, and then they went down together to the keep and the day. She walked beside him in the corridor. She did not walk behind and he did not walk ahead. They walked side by side, and if the corridor was wide enough for that, they walked side by side, and if it was narrower they adjusted without thinking, and at the bottom of the main stairs they went different directions. She to the library where she had reading to finish, and he to the war room where Cole was already waiting with the morning's administrative concerns, and she walked away from him toward the library. She did not look back to see if he was watching. She knew he was. She had learned this about him, that he watched in the way that people watch things they are paying genuine attention to. Not a surveillance, not a check, just attention given freely, the way you give attention to things that matter. She went to the library and sat down and opened the book she had been reading, which was the 2nd volume of the Territorial History, a section on the formal structures of acknowledgement and record, which she was reading partly because it was relevant to recent events, and partly because she read everything she could find, and this was what was available. She read for 2 hours. Then she went to find Percy, who had information about the brown horse and had apparently been waiting to deliver it since breakfast. She listened to the information about the horse. She asked 2 questions. She went to the stable. Emery was there. He looked at her and she looked at him. "She let me put the saddle on this morning," he said, "first time." "She trusts the process now," Nell said. "She trusts you," he said, in the matter-of-fact way of a man who calls things what they are. She looked at the brown horse in the stall. The horse looked back. She put her hand flat against the front of the stall. The horse walked forward and pressed her nose against Nell's palm. She stood there for a while, not moving, not speaking, just present in the way that she had learned to be present with the horse, still enough that the horse had decided she was safe, patient enough that the horse had decided she was worth approaching. The stable was warm with animal warmth and the smell of hay and the particular quiet of a place where nothing urgent was happening. She thought, this is also staying. Not the large version. Not the formal record and the name and the counsel and the acknowledgement, the small version, the hand at the stall every morning, the 8 mornings before the nose pressed against the palm, the chair that appeared without explanation, the bread set aside, the record signed. Staying was made of small things. She had known this in the abstract since she was 7 years old, navigating alone, accumulating small things until they added up to enough. She had known it as a survival fact, a logistical truth. She had not known it as a comfort until now. She stood with her hand at the stall and her eyes open and the morning around her, and she let herself know it as a comfort, which was different, which was allowed, which was the specific thing about being here that she was still adjusting to. That things were allowed. She stood there until the horse's nose moved away, and then she stood a little longer just because she wanted to, and then she went back to the keep for the midday meal, and the day continued. It was a Thursday that became a Friday, the way all Thursdays do, and then a week, and then a month, and then the season changed, and the road below the east tower became first muddy and then dry, and the garden below the window came back green after the winter, and the low chair stayed at its angle and the bed stayed against the far wall and the cloth stayed on the shelf behind the book on the first shelf above the basin. And Nell slept in the bed and woke early and went to the east tower and came down to breakfast and went to the library and went to the stable and came back, and did these things again, and the doing of them again and again was the meaning of staying. She was 9 when she arrived. She was 10 in the spring, as she had predicted, and the cook made bread with seeds in it for the occasion, and Percy gave her the record of the 60-year-old inquiry with a dedication written in it that used words above his usual register, which meant he had looked them up, and Myra arranged something small in the great hall that was not quite a formal event, but had the warmth of one. Aldrich gave her nothing. He came to the east tower at the usual time, and she was there, and he stood beside her at the window, and after a while he said, "Happy birthday, Nell." She said, "Thank you." They looked at the valley. It was exactly right. She stood in the morning light of the east tower on her 10th birthday in the stronghold on the mountain, where she had arrived at the gate 9 months ago with a cloth and a plan, and the certain knowledge that the person whose name was on the cloth would be adequate to what she needed. He had been more than adequate. She had been right about the evidence. She had been right about the direction. She had been right, standing at the gate on that cold morning, looking up at the guards on the wall, that the door was going to open. It had opened. She had walked through it. And she was here.